This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate fifth part of what if Naruto was betrayed by Leaf after Pain Attack. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Wind Country. Menma was walking idly through the many sand dunes that made up Wind Country's vast desert. The scorching sun and bone jarring wind had no effect on him. Menma glanced down to examine the sand as he was about to take another step forward when his foot suddenly froze in midair. He thought to himself, chakra-infused sand, used to detect intruders, and then he looked up again, scanning the entire desert in front of him, Sanagakure still out of sight. He concluded, grinning behind his mask, and there's a ring surrounding the entire village. A 50-mile radius. No doubt the doing of the cage. Smart. And then he finally stepped down onto the sand to continue on his way. Might as well let them know I'm coming, just to give them a little scare. The cage office in Sanagakure's cage building. Gaara was taking in the brief quiet between mountains of paperwork while he was relaxing at his desk when he sensed a presence in the sand surrounding the village thanks to his chakra. Infused sand. There was only one presence, and it was approaching from the north rather than the path that traders and merchants used to travel through the desert and reach the village. So, you've finally arrived, he thought to himself before pressing an earpiece button. The captain of his village's Anbu was waiting for him to give the order. Prepare the village for an attack, escort the citizens to the underground shelters and have the entire village on lockdown. I don't want anyone hurt in the coming attack. By whom, I may ask? Gaara remained silent, to which the Anbu replied, and he hurriedly began to execute the command. Gaara got up from his desk and moved to the windows to its right, where he peered down at his Anbu escorting the people. Suzaku, Naoshi. The two Akatsuki members were in his office waiting for him to give them orders right away. Deter the intruder for as long as possible while I prepare the village for his arrival. Suzaku grinned, sure thing boss, come on Naoshi. I'm itching to punch this guy's lights out. Suzaku was born with the ability to naturally release flames from his body due to his extensive use of the fire release. Naoshi nodded and the two departed, leaving Gaara by himself in his office once more. Yes, let us go. He waited a few more seconds, standing there in silence, then closed his eyes, picked up his sand gourd, went back to his desk, and sat down again, resting his elbows on the desk, waiting for his guest to arrive. 35 miles distant from Sanagakure at the slightest sound, Menma perked up and quickly went back to walking idly, the endless waves of sand sweeping past him. Menma sighed and remarked, sand, and a little more sand over there. He wanted to wait and see what would happen, but he also wanted to get to the village as soon as possible. The sand underneath him suddenly parted, and he jumped back as Suzaku shot out of the sand, missing Menma by a narrow margin with his fire blade. He landed on the sand and shook off the sand that was still on him while grinning. Wow, thought you would never show up, was getting stuffy in there. Menma, hiding his emotions behind his emotionless exterior, thought bitterly, Suzaku. It had to be Suzaku, one of the most powerful shinobi in existence. Fucking tastic. Suzaku, puffing on a cigar, watched him. Menma asked, well, sorry to keep you waiting. I guess you're out here to prevent me from taking the Ichibi? Suzaku grinned and gave Menma permission to cross his arm as his fireblade dispersed. Menma narrowed his eyes as Suzaku began, something like that. Heard you fucked up the rakeage pretty bad, that I'm a little ticked off at. Suzaku's expression changed to a deep, hateful scowl. As more fire erupted across his body, Suzaku said, but with you killing Byako and coming close to doing the same with Noboru. That shit pissed me off. I'll take delight in snapping your neck. Menma, having prepared himself to fight Suzaku, silently cursed to himself. Dokuten. Shisoku shi no Kumo. Menma turned just in time to witness Naoshi, his face mask pulled down, breathing out a massive cloud of dark green gas directly onto him. To make matters worse, the gas was poisonous and was seeping in through the eyeholes in his mask. Cough, cough, cried Menma as he started to experience severe chest burning and a tightening in his throat. Naoshi smirked and stated, first the burning sensation, then your throat becomes swollen and tightens, then suffocation. A simple poison but effective. He enjoyed enumerating the symptoms of his various poisons to his victims before they passed away. He thought quickly, I have to get rid of this poison, as he leapt out of the gaseous cloud and moved a short distance away from the two Akatsuki members. He continued to cough until he turned to face them and spoke quickly, using his chakra to drive the poison out of his system and lungs. Then, in order to shield himself from further poisons, he created a layer of chakra around his body. With a smile on Suzaku's face, he turned back to face them and asked, "Now then, where were we?" Menma was caught off guard when the Uzumaki executed a completely new technique that was distinct from the fire and wood release techniques he could use. "We're at the part where I kick your ass." "Yotan. Yokai no jutsu," exclaimed Suzaku. Menma swore as he jumped back to avoid the tidal wave of lava that formed from Suzaku's mouth and quickly spread out to form a gigantic sheet several yards across. The lava hardened instantly and produced an intense amount of smoke that made it difficult for Menma to see. Suzaku quickly launched his next attack by donning both his brand.new lava release armor and his go.to fire release armor in the split second that separated his strike and the smoke's creation. Menma was searching wildly through the smoke for his assailant when he glanced to his left and Suzaku struck him in the face with a fist covered in lava and fire, sending him flying back several yards due to the force of the blow. He crashed into a sand dune, launching a shower of grains of sand into the air, and as Naoshi watched his partner battle, purple smoke began to seep from the sleeves of his cloak. A moment later, a silver orb bearing the kanji for hand began to float in each cloud from each sleeve. Akuma no Te. Menma lifted his hand to his mask, growling a little as he saw that part of it had broken off on the right side and that the area around the break was severely scorched. Menma was covered in a cloud of sand particles stirred up by his impact. He thanked God that he had taken off his slashed headband, which was a significant indicator of who he was, and that his mask, which only revealed his eye, ear, and middle of the forehead, much like Obito's mask from his fight with Conan in the anime, manga, still covered his birthmarks that resembled whiskers. He rose from the sand and looked at Suzaku and Naoshi, the two Akatsuki members, his single red eye glaring at them with deep animosity. "Damn. That was one hard hit," he said. Suzaku grinned, his fire release armor remaining while his lava release armor soaked back into his skin. "Well, look what we have here. Seems the masked man can be touched," he said. Menma then noticed the purple smoke coming from Naoshi's sleeves and wondered why, recalling something about Naoshi being the result of a clandestine kinjutsu project developed by Kusagakure. Then he received his answer when, out of thin air, 4 enormous purple hands, 2 of which developed claws and the other covered in plate, like spikes on its back, formed around him. These hands were large enough to easily crush an adult. Naoshi questioned, "Do you know why they call me nature's poisonous thorn?" As the 2 hands that had grown claws made 3 hand signals in a row before clasping hands. "Abara Sakai!" exclaimed Naoshi as Menma abruptly leapt to the side and a massive, hideous-looking spike with a sickly green color emerged from the sand. Then, in front of his eyes, more of these thorns, all different sizes, shot up from the earth, encircling them in a massive ring. A massive tree, roughly the size of a 2-story house, rose from the center of the ring, armed to the teeth with sharp thorns covering its bark. To Menma's amazement, even grass emerged from the sand below and covered the entire ring, not extending outside of it but remaining inside its boundaries. "What is this?" he asked. Menma's visible eyes squinted to try and make out the shapes of Naoshi and Suzaku in the thick fog that was released when giant pot, like plants at the base of the giant tree, opened up with a hiss. Observing from the top of the enormous tree, Suzaku grinned and knew exactly where Naoshi was at all times. Unfortunately for his opponent, he didn't. Menma thought, "Damn it. I can't see because of this fog." Afterward, he discovered that the layer of chakra shielding him had also disappeared, and has deprived me of my defense against poison. I need to be cautious. He moved forward a few feet, then instantly regretted it as several foot long thorns emerged from the mist and pierced his chest, burning his body horribly until he pulled them out of his skin. Damn. No wonder he was an Anbu, he thought to himself once more as the dull, aching sensation he was experiencing from the puncture wounds was eliminated by the regenerative qualities of both his chakra and the cells of Hashirama flowing through his veins. Then, without warning, one of Naoshi's enormous purple fists crashed into his side, breaking his arm and sending him flying several feet into the thick fog. As soon as he was upright again, he let out a moan, realizing that something was seriously wrong. When he turned around, he realized he was standing directly beneath the stubborn tree that was causing the dense fog. The grass around him abruptly tightened around his ankles and snaked up his body, limiting his range of motion and, to his amazement, proving to be incredibly resilient despite his struggles. Shit, 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 the voice said. Akuma no te. Gaiso ken dongon. His eyes widened as one of the clawed fists came at him so quickly that he was unable to react in time. He smashed his body against the bristling face of the tree, causing pain to shoot up his spine as the poison coating it seeped into his veins, instantly paralyzing him from head to toe. Naoshi finally emerged from the mist, his face mask back over his mouth, his eyes emotionless. The hand that had shot into him opened, and he fell unwillingly into its palm, the fingers closing tightly around him. Naoshi said, "This was too easy. Goodbye, masked man." And then, with a single, fast movement, the hand tightened, crushing Menma's whole body and causing blood to spurt from the spaces between its fingers, flow down the fist, and fall to the ground. The fog vanished in an instant, exposing the area to the outside world once more. Suzaku jumped down to stand beside Naoshi and gazed at the bloody fist that contained Menma's crushed body. Patting Naoshi on the shoulder, Suzaku grinned and said, "Easy as pie." Was it? The two Akatsuki members spun around, but it was too late. With one hand, Menma shot a small wooden stake at Suzaku, and with the other, he extended multiple tree branches shaped like foo dog heads, wrapping tightly around Naoshi to bind him. Suzaku avoided the stake because he knew it was the same attack as the raikage, but Menma quickly took care of him, striking him in the side of the temple and instantly knocking him out. Meanwhile, Naoshi lost consciousness due to the foo dog heads holding him in place, draining his chakra. Menma yelled, "Now that that obstacle is out of the way, time for the Ichibi," as he bounded out of the thorny circle and raced across the desert toward Sanagakure. The village was deserted when he got there. Everyone had left in anticipation of his arrival. He thought to himself, how quaint. Then he saw the cage tower and went toward it, climbing the steps to the front door and entering through it. He climbed all the way up to the top floor and saw the two oak doors that blocked his view of his intended victim. Expecting a surprise attack any moment now, he walked over to them and touched the doorknob. However, after a few seconds, when it never materialized, he shrugged, opened the door, and entered to find Gaara staring at him with his chin resting on his hands. Menma sneered behind his mask as Gaara saw the damage the two Akatsuki members had done to him, but he said calmly, "I've been expecting you." Menma laughed and peered at the Jinchuriki, saying, "I assume Suzaku and Naoshi noticed that they amuse you for a short while?" Menma narrowed his eyes and said, "I suppose so. I left them alive if that's what you're wondering. I see you cleared out the village for my arrival. How kind of you." Gaara heard Shukaku talking to him in his head. "This guy. I recognize his chakra from somewhere. Are you sure, Shukaku?" "Positive. Give me a few to think about it." "We may not have a few." With some malice in his voice, Menma asked, "So, if I may ask, are you going to surrender your Biju to me, or will this have to get messy?" Before Shukaku's pupil changed into a diamond with 4 black dots surrounding it and his right eye developed black sclerae, Gaara said, "I'm afraid not. You see, Shukaku and we've made a pact, you see? A bond of friendship, if you will. I look out for his back, and he looks out for mine. This in turn has allowed me to do this." Menma remarked, "Ah, tailed beast mastery. Well then, this fight should prove interesting," and Gaara grinned. "Yes, it shall." Abruptly, the sand clone burst into a shower of sand, causing Menma to shield his eyes as explosive tags concealed in the sand caught hold of his cloak and ignited. Shit. The tags exploded, causing a column of smoke to rise from the cage tower and engulfing the office in flames. Menma, with his cloak's right sleeve in tatters, flew up into the air and gently landed on the building's roof, where he saw the real Gaara staring at him with his arms crossed and sand from his gourd floating around him. Without getting a response from Gaara, Menma remarked, "Quite a tactical genius, aren't we? Clearing out the village so no one will get in the way and setting a clone of yourself rigged with explosives to detonate, very smart." Menma shrugged in response as he said dryly, "I didn't want anyone to get hurt in this fight." Gaara narrowed his eyes at the man as he sneered and said, "Whatever you say. I'll let the first move be yours." Menma was startled when Gaara abruptly waved his hand to the right and a portion of the cage building collapsed into a cloud of sand that hurtled toward him, forcing him to duck out of the way. Gaara extended his other hand, causing the sand beneath Menma's roof to shoot skyward and entangle his left leg and ankle, imprisoning him until the sand cloud swept past him once more. Menma yelled, "Rasenringu," as he prepared the move and threw it at Gaara. The case cage grinned as his absolute defense activated, encircling him in a dome of sand that stopped the spiraling ring in its tracks. Menma said to himself, of course. His absolute defense is legendary, rumored to never having been pierced, but it was too late. The sand had already wrapped itself around his right arm, and Gaara had emerged from the dome, his fist clenched. Sabaku Soso. The sand exploded, crushing Menma's arm and squishing blood onto his cloak from the sand. Menma didn't even flinch. Jinten. Kage no Taijin no Jutsu, Menma uttered as his body vanished and then reappeared next to the sand. Gaara then used her manipulation skills to make Menma's body levitate back onto him and coil around him as he stayed inside the now partially vanished sand dome from his absolute defense. Menma, his crushed arm hanging limp by his side, congratulated himself, saying, "You're the first to ever injure me like this. Suzaku got close, that's how he broke my mask, but you took the cake." He took hold of his shoulder and squeezed hard. Gaara opened his eyes as the crushed arm came away from him and hit the ground with a sickening smack. Instead of blood, the crushed arm oozed a strange white substance that fascinated Gaara. Menma said, "Let's get started again, shall we?" as he cracked his neck and fixed his gaze on Gaara. When a cloud of sand floated in front of Gaara and started shooting sandballs at Menma, the latter leapt and dodged them as they came at him, tearing up the ground and leaving large holes where they struck. "Very well, Rendon, Suna Shigur," Gaara said. Then Menma leapt forward, just in time to see a larger tendril break off from the larger one and latch onto Menma's other arm. The tendril, which was attached to Gaara's sand dome, swung at him, narrowly missing him. Menma glared at the ground in front of Gaara and said, "Bah, you forced me to do this. I tried to make it fair, but oh well. Kaijiten. Pointo Baranko Shometsu." Suddenly, the ground erupted in a catastrophic explosion that sent Gaara flying back and destroyed a good portion of the cage building. Gaara's eyes darted up to see Menma walk to the edge of the roof, and as he hit the street below, he grunted, sand levitating around him and several cracks appearing on his skin. "If I didn't have my sand armor and my absolute defense take most of that blast, I would be in trouble. And that was the demonic release, how did he obtain that as well?" Shukaku said, "We'll worry about it later, kid, it's time I provide some assistance." Gaara nodded, and Menma raised an eyebrow in curiosity as the same seals that covered the Tanuki's body started to stretch across Gaara's skin from his right eye. Menma felt the ground begin to tremble a little as Shukaku put his hands together and said, "This is where things start getting interesting." Then he saw it, and the sight of a 70-foot tall wave of sand hurtling toward the village made him instantly pale. He was greatly concerned when the sand leapt over the wall and started to levitate in the air, threatening to blot out the sun and cast a shadow over the entire village instead of simply smashing through the walls and destroying everything. At that point, it started to condense into enormous, ship-sized tendrils that were going to enclose both the cage building and him. Menma's eyes widened as the sand collapsed around him and the cage building, plunging him into darkness. "Idai Sabaku Wakuse Naya Soso," cried Gaara, clenching both fists as the blob of sand settled around it. The cage building and Menma inside were completely crushed, even disintegrating in some places, as the sand suddenly collapsed, causing a massive eruption of crushed debris and buildings to be heard inside. With a heavy breath, Gaara lifted the sand and saw the crushed remnants of the cage building scattered across the ground. He silently apologized to the entire village for causing that small amount of damage. It was then that the Tanuki finally realized who he was, and fortunately, neither he nor Shukaku could sense Menma's chakra anymore. "I finally figured it out. I know whose chakra that was." The excess sand he used from the desert surrounding the village returned there to join the sand dunes once more, and Gaara asked, "Whose was it?" as the sand floating around him went back to his gourd. It was, strange enough, the Kyuubi's chakra. Kyuubi? But it couldn't possibly be Naruto, he would never. Then. Who was that? We won't have to worry about it now, he's dead. Not really. Menma swung the kunai sword at him, striking against the sand before it wrapped around the sword, up his arm, and restrained him. At that moment, Gaara's absolute defense came into play. When Gaara turned to face him again, he saw that one red eye and saw the anger and hatred in it, but Shukaku knew it was a fox's. He said, "Hey, let me speak," and Gaara allowed him to address their prisoner. He asked, Menma smiling behind his mask, "So how does a person like you come to possess the wood release and that chakra of yours?" with a quiet laugh. Why don't you see for yourself? The sand that had been wrapped around his arms started to creep up his neck to his chin and lift the mask. Gaara's heart stopped when he saw the birthmarks that resembled whiskers, the fangs on his smile, and then, at last, the face of Menma Uzumaki, Naruto's missing son. Menma? He stammered as Menma kept grinning at him and the mask fell to the ground. He laughed and said, in the flesh. Shukaku and Gaara were shocked to learn that Menma had killed Killer Bee and Byako, critically injured Noboru, and taken Gyuki hostage. Menma kept snickering as a wooden branch emerged from Shukaku's sleeve, wrapped tightly around the chakra. Infused sand holding his arm, sucked it dry of its chakra, and freed his arm. Why? Why are you the man that's been doing all of this? Demanded Shukaku. It's simple really. I want to bring peace, short and simple. Shukaku growled, his fury and intense dislike of foxes surfacing from within. Through capturing Biju? What kind of plan for peace requires that? Menma walked slowly toward Gaara and said, the Eye of the Moon plan. The latter backed away to avoid him. What is that? Inquired Gaara coolly as he took charge, while Shukaku was occupied trying to calm down and come up with a reasonable solution to this mess. Shukaku's heart stopped at the mention of Menma's name. It calls for the 9 Biju to be sealed into the demonic statue of the outer path, and in doing so, it will revitalize the first-tailed beast, the Jubi. The 10 tails. Menma sneered. The Jubi, you plan to revive that thing? Menma, Gaara, and Shukaku finally said, yes, and with it, we shall return it to its true form as the god tree, the Shinju, and will use its eye and reflect it onto the moon itself, and perform the infinite Tsukuyomi worldwide, casting everyone into eternal slumber for all of eternity. A perfect world, no wars, no conflict, everyone a part of the Shinju within the eternal dream. That is the Eye of the Moon plan. Menma, Gaara, and Shukaku were left dumbfounded by this horrifying ideology imposed upon them by their former friend. Then, with his last bit of chakra, Gaara held out his hand and Menma became immobile as sand quickly crawled up his body, encasing him from head to toe. I cannot allow that to happen. Even if you are Menma, you are no longer the Menma I once knew. I will kill you here and now, Gaara said darkly. Gaara clenched his fist and exhaled, Sabaku Soso. Menma was crushed in the sand in an instant, his blood spilling onto the ground from the sand holding him, and Gaara went to his knees as the seals covering his body disappeared and his right eye returned to normal. With labored breaths, he exhaled and said, It's finally over. His eyes lowered from the sand column to the ground as he briefly relaxed. It was a deadly error, Rasenringu. Gaara realized that the Menma he had killed was actually a clone, a diversion, when he turned to see the real Menma hurl another spiraling ring at him from atop a building near the site of the former cage building. A quarter of the village was destroyed when the spiraling ring burst into a massive dome of chakra, leaving the area barren of all life and man-made structures. He was barely alive as Gaara sat in the middle of the barren landscape, his eyes slightly open, his sand armor cracking and falling off of him. I'm sorry, Shukaku. I couldn't protect you. The Tanuki said, It's okay, Gaara. Just go to sleep. Like old times. Gaara grinned a little and watched Menma come toward him from where he had fallen from the building. He thought, sleep. Hee. Before his breathing slowed and his muscles relaxed, sending him into unconsciousness. Menma approached him, looking down at him, and making a single sign with his foot to ensure he wouldn't attack him again. The amber sealing pot he used to capture Gyuki appeared behind him in a puff of smoke as he spoke, saying, Kachiyose no Jutsu. Kohaku no Johei. He had decided it would be better to summon it from Indra's base than to carry it around himself. Then, as the giant Tanuki began to form in the crater and he was about to fight or react to his unsealing from his Jinchuriki, he punched his hand through Gaara's chest and grunted as he pulled out the massive Ichibi chakra. Menma called out his name, and the Tanuki responded mindlessly, sealing itself inside the pot. Menma turned to face Gaara again and saw that he was no longer breathing, that his Biju had finally torn out of him, and that he had died. He began, now to send this back to Indra, then sighed as he turned to face his broken mask, and to get a new mask. He created another symbol and returned the sealing pot to the graveyard of the mountain, where an eager Indra approached it upon its return. He walked up to the pot and took Shukaku's essence out of it, saying, Well done Menma. You truly are an adept Biju capturer. He turned around and walked over to a table with a heavily sedated Horo on it. Zetsu had brought him there and quickly restrained him after the curse mark took control of him and turned him into a psychopathic killer. Now, what to do about him, he said as he turned back. Indra nodded, examining the curse mark on white Zetsu's face before having an epiphany. His former personality has been completely wiped out thanks to that curse mark of his. He's completely insane now. His darker side, Zetsu, was waiting for his orders as he said, I think I have a solution. And it involves you, Black Zetsu. What shall you have me do? Merge yourself with Horo's dark half and control his body, while his psychopathic personality does the rest. Fine. After 30 minutes, Taiyo City. A phone call comes in. Naruto here. Suna's been attacked. What? Where's Gaara? Answer me, damn it. He's right here beside me. Thank God. How is he? He's dead, and his Biju is gone. What? Akayuri stood by Naruto's office's 2 oak doors and inquired, how's he doing? She had been there for hours, worried about him and wondering why he hadn't left his office in 2 whole days. Not too well, he's been in there since he heard about Gaara and Kakashi, remarked Genkaku, who had returned to the city following Kakashi's death and was now regaining control of his Hirashi body. Because he was powerless to stop the person who killed him, he was holding himself responsible for his demise. Naruto, God, his former teacher and one of his closest friends, killed only a day apart, Akayuri said, feeling helpless at the moment as she peered at the oak doors. I've been doing the best I can do without him, but he's the CEO, we can't have him staying in there forever, Genkaku said, and Akayuri nodded regretfully at the veracity of his statement. With determination in her voice, she said, okay, I'll talk to him. Genkaku shrugged as he left, wishing her luck in their relationship. After taking a small swallow, she knocked on the door and exclaimed, Naruto? She tried the handle and discovered it was unlocked because there was not a sound coming from the office. She called out his name once more as she opened the door and poked her head inside. Naruto, leave me alone, Naruto muttered, slouching in his office chair, a bottle of beer in one hand, a 5 o'clock aftershave still on his face. He was a complete mess, with his hair disheveled, numerous beer bottles all over his desk and the floor around it, and a few empty tequila bottles and tiny cups mixed in as well. Akayuri thought sadly, oh Naruto, as she walked up to the desk and stood a few feet away from it, Naruto not reacting to her approach. Naruto, you can't stay like this, you've got to move on. Move on. Move on. Hee. Naruto laughed, then grew melancholy once more and drank more beer, tossing the bottle to the floor after he was done. How can I move on when my former teacher and friend were just killed? Please, tell me. Uzumaki sighed deeply as Akayuri bit her lip, unable to think of anything to answer his question. Akayuri scowled at his current condition as he said sadly, sinking even lower in his chair. That's what I thought. Now please, just leave me to my guilt. No, she firmly said, raising an eyebrow at Naruto's denial of his own words. What did you say? Akayuri turned around the desk and tightly gripped the chair, saying, I said no, Naruto. I'm not gonna just stand idly by and let you rot like this. Naruto gave her a somber, inebriated glance. But, Akayuri snapped, no, get your ass up. Naruto turned away from her, letting out another deep sigh, and Akayuri gritted her teeth. Akayuri, get your ass out of that chair and lead the company and the Akatsuki like the Naruto I know. I don't think I married a guy who lets his guilt and emotions control his life and wallows around feeling sorry for himself. Naruto shot her down once more, giving her a small smile. As she readied her under the belt line, which was guaranteed to elicit a reaction from him, she thought, so we're gonna play that game Time to go in with a low blow. Her question made Naruto freeze, his eyes narrowing. What would your mother and father think of you if they saw you like this? I asked. Don't bring them into this. Naruto regarded her slowly, his eyes glaring at her. What would your mother and father think of you if they saw you like this? She asked again. I said. Don't. As Akayuri spoke, Naruto erupted out of his chair like a rocket and looked her in the eyes, his next words laced with rage. They would be thinking, why is our usual hot, blooded, prideful, and fiery son sitting in a chair, drinking his life away and wallowing in his sorrow? He barked his teeth and growled softly, I said don't bring them into this. Akayuri didn't back down from him. With his inebriation worsening, Naruto's temper flared up as he raised his hand to her throat. What about Byako? What would he think of you if you just sit here doing this shit and not take action against the guy who ripped his heart out? Yelled Akayuri. Akayuri, don't follow this path. I'm warning you, he growled, but Akayuri was unfazed. Naruto's eyes narrowed as she spoke. I'm not afraid of you, Naruto. You can't touch me in the state that you're in. Akayuri, please, Akayuri asked, her fists tightening before Naruto swung at her. What are you going to do about it? Are you just gonna sit there like you were a few minutes ago and wallow in despair, or are you going to do something? Akayuri easily avoided the inebriated swing and then drove her fist into his stomach, taking the wind out of him and causing him to stagger back a few feet. He growled once more before sprinting towards her. Akayuri did the same move, but this time, she knocked him down. Naruto's face showed shock at being knocked flat on his ass like a child. Naruto was still staring at Akayuri, confused, when she said, "Get up." Akayuri angrily exclaimed, "I said get up, if you care about Kakashi, Gaara, Killer Bee, and Byako, now get up." After blinking, Naruto quickly regained consciousness, stood up, and turned to face her. She grinned back at him. "Now was that so hard?" she inquired, and Naruto glanced back at her after turning from the chair he had been sitting in a moment earlier. "You amaze me sometimes," he grinned, realizing that her words had helped him overcome his depression. "It's my job. Gotta keep you like this or I don't know what I'll do on Tuesdays," she smirked and said. Naruto frowned and gave her a firm hug before kissing her, relieved that he had been able to overcome his depression. Naruto nodded once more before snapping his fingers and making all the beer and tequila bottles vanish in a tiny ball of fire, clearing his desk and floor of everything. "Now, how about you get back to being your old self and catch this bastard, smiled Akayuri. "Call the Tsuchikage, Getsukage and the Mizukage. I need to speak with them about certain Jinchuriki and Biju." The graveyard at Mountain Menma said nothing as he created a new kitsune mask out of his chakra and put it back in place, concealing his face, while he also fixed his cloak. "You're doing very well right now, Menma. 2 Biju already in this short amount of time, very impressive," praised Indra. Menma said, "There's still the Gobi, the Rokubi, the Nibi, the Nanabi, and..." Indra concluded his statement. "And the Kyubi." Menma rolled his shoulder and said, "Yes. The Kyubi," looking a little taken aback at the name for a moment before shaking it off. He felt as though he didn't have a right arm. Menma looked at Indra and he shrugged, saying, "You know, you can attach artificial limbs from a Zetsu clone and regain your arm, right?" Menma said, I'm fine at the moment. I'll do it later with a new technique I created," before dissipating into a puff of smoke and emerging in a little camp he had built close to the Fire Country border. He went over his options and asked himself where to next, after putting out the fire he had started. Menma considered the 2 options for a short while before deciding to head east. Since Horo is out of Kamizen at the moment, that means I have Iwagakure to go to for the Gobi. I have Kirigakure for the Rokubi. I believe the Nibi and the Nanabi went to Getsugakure as well. But I'll leave Iwagakure to Horo when he recovers with the help of Zetsu. So I guess that leaves Iwa and Getsu for myself. And those 2 will take care of the resistance from Omegakure and Shimogakure," Menma said after considering the 2 options for a short while. When Horo eventually woke up back at the mountain's graveyard, he started to giggle a little and got up from where he had been sleeping, and Indra turned to look at him. "How are you feeling, Horo?" he inquired, observing the man rise to his full height and approach him, his face lit by a number of wall-mounted torches. From his position, black Zetsu covered his entire right side of his body and controlled his bodily functions, allowing Horo to speak and do other things. "He's doing quite well, actually. His body and that curse mark of his has already adapted to my presence on his body. Yes. Zetsu's body is oh so comfortable, he even made the pain of this damned curse mark go away. Hee-hee." Horo smiled, flashing his second row of tiny teeth that is hidden behind the first row of sharp teeth. As Indra asked, "Well, Menma left on his own already to capture more Biju. What do you plan to do?" Horo responded with another strange smile, grabbing his scythe and pulling the hood back over his head. The curse mark on his face was beginning to spread down his cheek, and his teeth were tearing through his lips to form a fanged smile that matched the other side of his demonic smile. With a somewhat shivering Indra, Horo laughed maniacally. "It's time to go to Iwagakure and spill some blood." Koi ha ha ha. He vanished in an instant amidst a flurry of crows, and Indra exhaled a sigh of relief upon his departure. The 6 paths of pain in Nagato materialized in front of him as he spoke, such an interesting and scary individual. Anyway, time to eliminate some of the opposition in Menma and Horo's way. Kachiyose no Jutsu. Edo Tensai. Several coffins rose from the ground and opened with a hiss. They had gray skin and multiple skin cracks that ran across different parts of their bodies, suggesting that they had been deactivated. With a single seal created by Indra, they all woke up at once. Their eyes turned a dull purple instead of the brighter, more vibrant purple that was typically associated with the Rinnegan, and the fissures in their skin disappeared, giving them a more alive appearance with healthier skin and other features. As Indra spoke, Nagato stepped forward and nodded, and the former 6 paths of pain, Yahiko among them, walked out of their coffins and vanished in a blur. You have your orders. Kill them both. Time to give her a nasty surprise. A few hours later, a megacure. After training at the top of one of the village's many metal skyscrapers since that morning, Senkuku inhaled deeply and sighed contentedly at the smell and feel of the gentle rain hitting his skin. He was standing there without a shirt or cloak. His 2 arms were encircled by metal gauntlets that gleamed in the meager sunlight that broke through the clouds overhead. Nearby, several shredded training dummies lay, the poor victims of the shuriken chains curled up inside the gauntlets. With several wrinkles around his eyes and a slashed kiri headband with his signature 3 horns still present, his appearance had changed over the years from a younger, more agile version of himself to an older, wiser, and unquestionably more experienced version. He also carried several scratches and other marks from previous battles. Sensing a chakra presence behind him, he turned slowly to see Conan coming toward him with a serious expression as she approached him from the roof's stairwell exit. "What is it?" he inquired, and Conan kept walking toward him before whispering something that caused him to gasp. He exclaimed, "You can't be serious." Conan sighed and took a small step back. "I'm afraid it's true. I wish it wasn't, but it is. Gaara's Biju has been captured. Kakashi is dead and the other Biju and Jinchuriki are being protected by everything the villages can get their hands on." Naruto discussed this news with the daimyo and they are none too happy with the current situation. Senkuku ruffled and a little annoyed. Of course they are. Their interests lie in the profit of their villages and countries. It can't be good when you have Indra and this masked guy, scratch that, they may be the same person, going around stealing Biju. Yes, exactly. Which means, she began, pausing mid-sentence to sense a chakra presence, one she hadn't felt in a long time, cross the village's protective barrier. In an instant, 7 figures descended onto the top of the skyscraper, right on top of them, and Senkuku hurried to her side as Conan's eyes widened in shock at who was standing there. Red and orange hair. Crimson eyes. Killing intent, cold and heartless. She stammered, "Nagato." Yahiko, as she watched her erstwhile allies rise from their kneeling positions, the other pains standing motionless behind them. Upon their deaths, Nagato and Yahiko appeared exactly as they had in life, with Yahiko looking youthful and Nagato looking withered and emaciated, his hair still white from the time he had to employ the samsara of heavenly light technique. As he prepared for a potential fight, Senkuku let some of the shuriken chain fall from his gauntlet and cursed, "Damn! It is them." Conan exclaimed, "Nagato, Yahiko. What's wrong with you, and how are you alive?" But then she noticed something. When she had visited their shrine earlier that month, she had noticed an anomaly in their hair but had dismissed it. Subsequently, she turned to face the 2 men in front of him and realized that someone had to have taken a piece from each of them and used their DNA to bring them back to life. When Yahiko raised his right hand and formed a black chakra blade in his hand while Nagato raised his left, Senkuku spoke wearily, "It was Indra who reincarnated them. And from the look they hold in their eyes, he's wiped all of their memories and feelings from their minds, reducing them to cold, heartless killing machines." "Bansho Tenin," he said, causing Senkuku to snort as he was thrown toward him and Yahiko to rear back his arm, threatening to impale him. "Not today, gentlemen," he thought to himself as he extended a chain from his right arm and wrapped it around a skyscraper's protruding antenna. He then pulled himself apart from the other 2 and threw himself around them, using his other hand to form one-handed seals. "Sweden. Swegadin," he exclaimed, and the rain instantly turned into a massive water torrent that resembled a drill and rushed towards the group of shinobi who had been reincarnated. Without turning away from Conan, The Preta Path lifted his right arm to block the blow with a white chakra shield. As Senkuku landed next to Conan, the chain he had launched was rolled back up into the gauntlet. As different pieces of paper began to float out of Conan's body, he said, "Listen to me, and listen good. The only way we're going to win is if you listen to exactly what I tell you." Senkuku nodded and drew out more of his shuriken chain, increasing its sharpness and cutting power with his chakra. This is going to be an interesting fight. Close to the boundary between the fire and water countries, Menma approached the fire country's sandy beaches, which faced a small island in the distance, and, beyond that, water country, the region that was home to Kirigakure. Menma narrowed his eyes and decided to investigate the large structures he could make out from the island near the coast. With a swift use of the shadow step technique, he appeared on the island in an instant, a ghost town consisting of a former village with all of its buildings completely destroyed, as if it had been done so with complete prejudice. He wondered, what is this place? As he made his way slowly through the deserted streets of the vast village. As he approached the edge of one sector, which had a large river running through it, Menma was able to see the ruins of what appeared to be a cage building across the river. With a swift leap across the river, he landed on the other side and resumed his journey towards the building he had spotted. When he finally arrived at the building, he came to a halt at the faded image of a symbol etched onto its decaying face. He was familiar with the red spiral crest since he had seen it on Suzaku's headband and Akatsuki cloak from. Menma exclaimed, "Uzushiogakure. The village of the Uzumaki clan," before turning around to have a closer look at the destroyed city in the distance. His body moved on its own and took a step forward towards the collapsing cage building, Menma's brain catching up with it after he had finally processed the fact he was in his home village. What happened here? Is this why there are so few Uzumaki members out in the world today? He wondered. He glanced around, noticing the mossy and vine-covered entrance hall walls. He removed some of the foliage from a nearby wall and noticed his clan's spiral crest once more, along with an old, rusted kunai with its tip buried in the wall. Then it dawned on him. An attacking force that used a different kind of kunai than he had ever seen destroyed the village. It was noticeably longer than a typical kunai knife, with a longer handle, a serrated edge, and multiple holes in the blade itself. As he surveyed the massive entry hall, he began to notice more of these knives embedded in the walls, as well as different-sized shuriken. This was the location of a combat. He crouched down to look at the floor and saw almost everywhere there were dry red patches. He knew right away that a great deal of blood had also been spilled. Regaining his balance, he headed toward a set of stairs that led to closed doors. It was there that he saw something unsettling. Thrown around the doors were hundreds of bodies embedded with shuriken and kunai, their bones old and rotted from years of decay. A dark aura hovered over the room, so he tiptoed around the bodies and approached the slightly ajar doors for a quick peek inside. He was startled by what he saw inside and hurried to open the heavy oak doors. He pried them open with all of his strength until they finally gave way, causing two more skeletons to fall beside him. These were probably the shinobi who had been keeping the doors closed to protect themselves from the enemy shinobi outside the room. Menma felt sick to his stomach as a foul smell came from the office, coming from a single body seated behind a desk. They were wearing old flak jackets with the Uzumaki clan crest on them. Menma was able to identify the man precisely because of the cage hat on the desk, which was adorned with the kanji for whirlpool, and had a striking orange and red hue. Additionally, the skeleton seated in the chair was dressed in cage robes. Menma approached the man, wanting a closer look, and said, "The Azukage, the leader of the village," just before he felt something touch his ankle. When he looked down and saw the trip-wire he had pulled, he cursed. Almost immediately after, a shadow attacked him, sending him hurtling out of the room and smashing into the entryway below. Menma gasped, "What the hell was that?" as he struggled to catch his breath and stood up, but not before two enormous seals materialized on the walls next to the Azukage's office door, and a cloud of smoke billowed out of them, encircling Menma. Their flak jackets were black and featured neck guards attached with steel buttons, fur adorning the collar and shoulder padding, and two metal clasps down the middle of the jacket to hold it all together. On the left side of the chest area was a single scroll pouch, and the Uzumaki clan crest was on the other. Their faces were concealed by a dark gray porcelain mask engraved with a spiral design around a single eyehole over the left eye, in addition to the long sleeves and hooded black shirts they wore under their flak jackets. Their hands and arms were also concealed by the sleeves. They also wore black pants, with shin guards that covered their ankles and toes. The weapons they carried were two hooked swords with sharpened hook tips and handguards that resembled the deadly and practical butterfly sword. Before a last unidentified figure emerged from the just opened office, Menma asked himself, "Who are these guys?" and narrowed his eyes, realizing that he was the shadow that had knocked him out of the room. He was dressed in the same clothes as the men who were encircling Menma, but he had a short, white goatee and multiple scars on the right side of his head and face, including one that extended over his right eye and down the side of his mouth to his chin. Menma asked, "Why did you attack me, and who are you?" But the unidentified assailant cut him off with a glare and folded his hands behind his back. "I should be asking you the same question, trespassing on our land and attempting to approach the remains of our leader." Menma shot back, "Trespass? I think not," with a shrug. "Then tell me who you are and why you are here, or I will order my men to kill you." Menma let out a sigh, removed his mask, showed the men his face, and clutched it to his side. Menma Uzumaki introduced himself. "My name is Menma Uzumaki, and I came here on my way to my destination. I had just found out that this was the ruins of my home village recently, and I was curious to discover the reason as to why it was destroyed." The man looked at Menma for a moment before raising his right hand, and the men round him relaxed and lowered their weapons. "You speak the truth, I believe you, clansman. So, you are an Uzumaki. May I ask who your father is, and do you know any other surviving members of our clan?" Menma grinned and said, "Sure, but I must know who I speak with first." He was relieved to finally learn that he was with his clansmen. Menma looked around in amazement at the men surrounding him as he introduced the man with a bow. "But of course. My name is Nintaro Uzumaki, and these men around you are members of the Kuruzu, the Black Vortex. We are the personal bodyguards of the Azukage and the village's elite, much like the Anbu I remember from so long ago." Nintaro smiled at the name Suzaku. Menma said, "Thank you. The answer to your question is that I don't remember my father's name, but I do know of another Uzumaki." Menma glanced at the bodies and several weapons strewn across the room before turning to face the elder Uzumaki. "Suzaku? I remember that man. A jovial and stubborn individual he was, but a great ally and friend to have on your side. It's unfortunate you do not remember your father's name," Menma said. Menma questioned. 3 questions. Why were you all in seals and have stayed alive all these years? Why was the village attacked, and who attacked it? Nintaro laughed as he stooped to the top step of the staircase and settled in. "I will answer the second question first. Back during the era before the Second Shinobi World War, when Suzaku was just a child, we were great allies with Konohagakure, since we are distant blood relatives with the Senju clan, whose first and second Hokage, Hashirama and Tobarama, were a part of, the former being its leader. We held such great prominence that other villages were afraid of our powers and our excellent skill with Fuinjutsu, so we are targeted. During the war, we were attacked by unknown shinobi. These men right here." He motioned to the skeletons that were behind Arashi said, his voice trailing off into sadness, "and were killed off, with only a few survivors managing to escape, one being Suzaku when he was a young adult. Our leader, the Azukage, and the rest of our force held out in that office up there for several days, defending against endless waves of the unknown attackers until we had been exhausted and unable to fight any longer. It was then when he himself sealed us into those seals as a trap for when any trespasser who would dare enter the area where they made their heroic last stand would be killed on sight, so as the memory of their sacrifice would not be tarnished. We stayed alive at the age we were back then while in the seal, which is why we still look young." Now that she had heard the story of the bravery and sacrifice that had taken place inside these very walls, Menma was in awe of his clan and grateful to be a part of such a proud group. "And did you ever figure out who had attacked you?" he inquired, and as Nintaro lowered his gaze from him, his small smile vanished. "Yes, we did. They had demon masks on their faces, high-collar jackets, and flak jackets. They were cloaked. We didn't realize who they were or who their leader was until we saw the clan crest on their backs," Arashi said, nodding to one of the masked Kuruzu members. The member then formed a seal, and a moment later, a chained shinobi who was clearly dead materialized next to him, his clan's crest engraved on the demon mask he wore. It was a red dot and white fan, the emblem of the highly respected but now extinct Uchiha clan. Menma looked at Nintaro in shock, saying, "The Uchiha destroyed Uzushiogakure? But weren't they a clan of Konohas, and that your 2 villages were allies? This makes no sense." "Yes, The Uchiha were the ones to do the act, but these men were different. They held deep resentment towards Konoha and us, thinking that Konoha was limiting and discriminating them, while they believed we were a threat to their power. These men were Rouge Uchiha, and held no ties to either village. Menma questioned, but who led them? Who would despise Konoha that much? Nintaro looked at him, clenching his fists as the abhorrent name rolled off his tongue. Several of the men surrounding Menma shivered at the notorious name, Madara Uchiha, the clan's former leader and the one who was thought to be killed at the hands of Hashirama Senju, he revealed. Menma said, Madara Uchiha, and Nintaro nodded. And Nintaro said, Menma clutching his chest, yes, it was him. Apparently, he had survived his encounter with Hashirama and secretly gathered followers from his clan that resented Konoha as well, and attacked their allies, while they were preoccupied with the Second Shinobi World War. That is who attacked us. What happened to Madara after that tragic day is beyond me. At that moment, everything clicked and he realized something. The Uchiha, he thought, and then he averted his gaze from Arashi to consider the realization for a little while. A slight pain rose in his chest and he tightened his grip, grunting a little before it went away. And Madara. I faintly remember someone telling me that Madara was in fact a descendant of someone. But I can't remember who that person was or who that ancestor was, he thought. Nintaro nodded as Menma said, thank you for the information, I feel much better now that I know of this tragedy. When Menma began to move in the direction of the cage building exit, Nintaro watched him go and then called out to him, saying, I'm glad to have been of service. You may leave to go to where your destination is. And Menma, he put his mask to his face and looked back at him. He said, Menma nodding, do not forget about us here. Remembering what happened here will preserve the memory of our clan. He then put the mask back on his face and left the building, leaving Nintaro to watch him and his men. Menma jumped to the summit of the cage building and then to a cliff behind the village, which provided a great view of the island's surrounding sea. Kirigakure, his final destination, lay beyond. With a deep sigh, he turned to face the ruins of Uzushiogakure behind him before vanishing in an instant. Desperate to escape the terrible memories he now carried from discovering the secret reason behind his clan's demise. It would take him a long time to figure out who was the true mastermind. The person fled from branch to branch, clearly fleeing from something that was pursuing him, and he was moving quickly and with terror in his eyes as the trees shook and rustled. He was being pursued by something extremely dangerous and terrifying, and he most definitely did not want to die. He had a slashed kiri headband around his head, and a bag containing weapons and scrolls was slung over his shoulder. He was a renegade shinobi from Kirigakure, and only a certain kind of shinobi would be pursuing someone like him. A hunter. Nin is a unique kind of Anbu that tracks down and murders kiri defectors with great prejudice. On one of the many islands that made up water country, Menma was strolling leisurely down a dirt road while on his way to Kirigakure. The breeze was softly blowing his empty sleeve, which used to hold his missing arm, to the right. He thought, just as a precaution, he was holding a backhanded kunai in his other hand, ready for anything that could come at him. If I knew better, I wouldn't be walking so blatantly around in plain sight, but thankfully my identity still remains a mystery. The only people that saw me are either injured or dead. Abruptly, a man appeared from the trees to his left, slamming through him with great force and yelling, "Get the hell out of my way." Menma watched the man run for a few more seconds before he was suddenly caught in a web of vines and roots that were growing out of the ground, allowing him to get closer. Menma turned to face the man and uttered angrily, "No one pushes past me without a reason. Hey, let me G. You don't know what you're doing to me." While the man kept freaking out, Menma calmly said, "Hold on, calm down. I just want to know why you pushed past me so rudely." Then he realized why he was so afraid, the slashed headband he was wearing. "Oh, I see it now. You're being hunted by Hunter, Nin." The man's head whipped back and forth in nervousness, sweat streaming down his face in increasing terror. "Not just any hunter. Nin. It's the Hunter." Menma asked, "The Hunter? Who is this quaint individual?" Before tightening the roots around the man's throat, causing him to cough and sputter as breathing became more difficult. Menma smirked a little at the description of this Hunter, but the man gasped, "He's the most fearsome and gruesome of all the Hunter. Nin's in Kiri. He ruthlessly pursues anyone who defects and brutally kills them. All he brings back to signify their death is their head." Menma smiled and tightened his grip on the man, who was now freaking out and completely horrified by the announcement. "Well, This hunter sounds positively wonderful to me. How about we wait for him then, Menma asked. He was making a valiant effort to free himself, but it was not working. After a mere 30 seconds of waiting, a number of blurs emerged from the tops of the trees and encircled them. They looked like 4 masked shinobi, their bodies concealed behind large, hooded cloaks, with embu masks on with slits for eyeholes and the Kiri symbol engraved in the forehead. The hood it wore covered the top of their heads, hiding the upper portion of their masks so that their victim could only see the eyeholes. The end of the cloak reached their ankles, and their sleeves covered their hands. Upon observing Menma holding their target, a masked hunter, Nin remarked, "Looks like we got our work cut out for us." Another, crouched on the ground, uttered, "Yeah, that just makes it easier for us to kill him. Whoever you are, I thank you for capturing our target, but if you will give him to us, it will be appreciated," said a different voice. Suddenly, a final hunter, Nin, appeared from the tree line. He was dressed in a dark maroonish cloak and had a red swirl around the bottom of his mask. Menma looked up at him with curiosity for 2 reasons. One was the slightly more feminine tone of the man's voice, which led him to believe that he was the hunter the Rouge Kiri shinobi mentioned. Secondly, the man's cloak fit him better and showed off more of his body's curves. In his hand, he held one of the fabled 7 swords of the mist, the needle longsword Nuabari, which is said to be able to pierce and sew together anything. The man asked the hunter, who gave a slight laugh in response, "So, are you the hunter this fine gentleman spoke of? It appears that you are also one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist." Before the missing Nin started laughing, the hunter, Nin, said, "My reputation precedes me. That is I, yes, though I regret to say the 7 have been reduced to 2 members, myself and Chojuro, the wielder of Haramekure." He laughed hysterically. "Now I have all of you cornered," and then dropped a tiny tracking device from his hand along with his terrified captive act. The hunter, Nin with the big cleaver sword, had a kunai suddenly implanted into his neck, and the other hunter, Nin's, realized instantly that there were other men nearby. The man laughed, "You don't mess with one of the Vox Populi without getting a little blood on your hands, and by blood, I mean yours," before he kicked Menma back toward the 2 enemy shinobi encircling them and freed himself from his restraints. One of the enemy shinobi shot a stream of fire at the hunter, catching the bottom of his cloak as he leapt away to avoid the attack. "Kill them," the hunter yelled. "Well, I simply enjoy a good battle," Menma uttered in a seductive tone as he stopped and stabbed one of the shinobi in the throat with the kunai he was holding. He then turned and kicked the other shinobi in the head. "Mokuton. Sashiki no Jutsu," he exclaimed before thrusting his hand into the other shinobi's abdomen, causing a large number of wooden branches to burst out of his body. Menma looked for another victim, his mask twisted into a mad smile as blood spattered onto his cloak. Fortunately, Menma was able to use a small genjutsu on the roots to make it look like the man had been impaled by several kunai before he turned around and stopped dead. This was made possible because none of the other hunter, Nin, noticed the wood release jutsu. The hunter was no longer a male, but rather a female, and quite a beautiful one at that, as his cloak had completely burned away. She wore black pants and a waist guard with a black sleeveless top that showed off her abs and was extremely form-fitting, highlighting her bust. In addition, she wore the striped arm and leg guards that the majority of Kiri shinobi wore, and the 7 swordsmen's signature bandages were wrapped around her neck. Seems to be similar to Kushimaru Kuriare's attire. Her hair was the same shade of maroon as her burned cloak, reaching her waist. In addition to her Kiri headband, a red cloth was tied around her head with a distinct knot at each side, allowing the rest of her hair to fall naturally downward. He paused for a moment, admiring her deft and quick moves as well as her merciless brutality. Her sword Nuabari impaled several shinobi at once, and the metal cord at the end of the needle sword tightly gathered the shinobi's bodies into clusters. Arrogance like this, he thought to himself before ducking just in time to see a kunai fly over his head, the thrower growling with annoyance. "Rasenringu," Menma uttered as he created the spiraling ring and hurled it at the shinobi, clenching his fist to cause it to enlarge. The spiraling chakra wings then ground the shinobi to nothingness and a great deal of blood, much like a blender. He heard a battle cry from behind him and saw the last surviving shinobi charging at him brandishing a big sword. With a sly smile on his face, he sidestepped the swipe and kicked it out of his reach. He then thrust his hand firmly up into the man's throat, using his superhuman strength to lift him high into the air. As Menma tightened her grip on the man's throat, everyone noticed and watched in silence. Menma's smile only grew wider as the hunter focused his attention on the man, who was gripping Menma's wrist and gasping as his breaths became shorter and faster. Jigoku. Heijun Gobi. He exclaimed, his eyes glowing, and the man started to scream as numerous deep, horrifying stabbing wounds appeared all over his body, with blood dribbling out of them like a waterfall. Menma playfully asked, enjoying the man's screams as he toyed with him, "You want to die, don't you? You want me to kill you, right?" Ordinary people would be scared and repulsed by the terrifying spectacle, but the hunter, Nin, especially the hunter, were entertained. Seems he has a sadistic side to him, interesting. The heavily bleeding shinobi cried out in excruciating pain, "Stop it, please. Stop." Menma enjoyed hearing him scream. Menma tightened his strangulation grip on the shinobi, who was screaming at the top of his lungs, saying, "Beg me to kill you? Beg. Please, kill me." Menma violently killed the man by snapping his neck, and the loud snap that followed instantly reverberated throughout the quiet clearing. With no regret or emotion in his actions, he dropped the still, bleeding body, wiped his hands on his cloak, and turned to face the hunter. Nin again. When he reached the other side, the hunter's eyes widened as he saw something behind them. He then threw out his hand, causing a kunai to fly past her head and stab another shinobi in the throat directly behind her. He motioned to the dead shinobi that had set off the trap after being stabbed through the back by one of the hunter. Nin's kunai. "All done. And I'm guessing that you need this gentleman's head to prove you killed him," he said. One of the hunter, Nin, said, "Yes. We need to destroy the body." He nodded and moved aside to allow them to finish their task. Approaching the body, the hunter and Nuabari worked quickly to separate the head from the neck and put it in a burlap sack. Meanwhile, the other three hunter, Nin, cremated the body without moving it, erasing their own existence along with that of their fallen teammate. When they were finished, the hunter threw the bloody bag over her shoulder and held Nuabari while she gestured down the rapidly disappearing road. She waved, "Come on, if you were on your way to Kirigakure, we'll take you there." Menma smiled behind his mask as he followed them as they started to walk down the road. "I wonder what her name is, and since I just saved these 4 hunter, Nin and their leader, this just made infiltrating the village even easier. Now I can locate the Rokubi under their trust," he thought, raising an eyebrow in confusion. He brushed the strange feeling from his mind and carried on walking, but as he struggled to look away from her, the strange feeling reappeared. Fortunately, the light mist blanket covering the village allowed them to arrive safely. As the hunter said goodbye to her companions, Menma watched them drive away. With a breath of exhalation, the hunter removed her mask, causing Menma to raise an eyebrow in curiosity about her appearance. She turned to face Menma, taking a breath of fresh air without the mask on, and exclaimed, "Phew. Now I can finally take this thing off." She smiled cockily, and Menma was taken aback to see that, unlike other swordsmen, her teeth were only slightly sharpened on her canines, giving her a feral appearance. Menma grinned slightly and said, "You know, I never asked what your name was." Menma smiled behind his mask as she countered, saying, "Neither did I ask for yours. That mask gives you a mysterious look." Can't give her my real name, but then again, there are other Menmas. "My name is Menma," Menma stated emphatically. The hunter crossed her arms and gave him a brief glance, then brought them back to her sides and turned Nuabari in her palm. As Menma recognized her name, some alarm bells went off in his head. "Well then, Menma, my name is Amari Ringo," she said. "Ringo. Ringo. I've heard of that clan name before." Menma just stared at her sword-wielding sister, Nuibari, while she studied her own, saying, "Yeah, I'm related to the last generation swordsman, Amiri Ringo, the wielder of the Kiba swords. Though oddly enough, I actually wield the Nuibari, Kushimaru Kuriare's sword, better than the swords she wielded." He pointed a finger at it and said, "Don't you have to present that to the Mizukage?" Amari instantly remembered and snarled at herself for forgetting. "You're right. Come on, you can come too," she exclaimed as she leapt to her feet, Menma tying multiple seals with his hand in tandem as he followed. Mokuton. Shikwan Keitai Sicho. He muttered to himself as the skin on the stump that used to be his right arm split and bubbled and the bone and flesh started to reform in a characteristic pasty white color. Eventually, his entire arm had reformed, and he felt satisfied once more. When they reached the cage tower, They went inside and made their way past a few shinobi and other people before reaching the Mizukage's office. "Hello, Arya. I hope your mission was successful," Mei Terumi, the fifth Mizukage, said as she sat behind her desk. Menma continued to be in awe of the fact that at 45 years old, she still had the youthful beauty. With a smile, Amari held up the burlap sack and showed Mei the head, saying, "But of course." She then quickly hid it again when Mei nodded. Observing Menma in the background, she said, "Good, and I see you brought a visitor with you," as she rose from her chair. Menma stepped forward and gave the Mizukage a small bow in acknowledgement of her position. "Yes, this is Menma. He helped my team capture and take care of the missing Nin and some other members of the Vox Populi gang. He also saved my life when one of their members attempted to strike me from the back," Menma said. "Greetings, Lady Mizukage. You can stay in the village as long as you want, see the sights, stroll the streets. You're welcome here after your deeds," Mei grinned and said, letting the two go. "I thank you for helping Amari and her team with their mission." Amari grinned and said, "Well, have fun touring the village. I'm going to train." Then she left him by himself on the cage tower steps, leaving him to mull over his thoughts. He thought, now that I've infiltrated the village, I need to try and search for the Rokubi. They've probably already heard of my doings in Kumo and Suna, so they're bound to have hid him somewhere and had given him extra protection. I'll just send a wood clone to search for him. Suddenly, a glob of wood appeared from his right shoulder, quickly forming into an identical replica of him, who nodded and leapt away. Menma looked at his blood-soaked cloak and said, "Now that that's taken care of, I can draw suspicion away from myself by doing to stuff Mei mentioned. First though, this cloak is a bit unsightly." When he saw that no one was watching, he used his demonic chakra to absorb his cloak and reveal that he was wearing red-brown sandals, baggy black pants, opera-length black gloves without fingers, and straps made of studded red-brown leather. However, he had a plain black circle covering his navel on his abdomen, which was the seal that held the material that Indra had implanted inside of him. But to the onlooker, it was just an ordinary tattoo. As he walked down the steps to begin his village walk, he said, "Here we go." He spent hours upon hours walking the streets, taking in everything while looking through the eyes of his clone, which was working non-stop to find the Rokubi and its Jinchuriki. It was getting late, and he finally made the decision to get something to drink. Entering a small pub, he discovered that some Kiri shinobi were having a rough time at the bar. He saw a hunter Nin with Amari and popped into the seat next to him. The man recognized him from his mask. He sipped from his beer glass and asked, "So, how do you like the village?" Menma nodded slowly. Menma nodded to the hunter. "Nin, it's a good place to live. It's come such a long way since the days of the Bloody Mist." Though the village had been notoriously dubbed the Village of the Bloody Mist, during the terrible reign of the fourth Mizukage, which had ended many years earlier, it was still a sensitive topic of conversation, so he remained silent. Menma broke the ice by asking, "So, do you know where Amari went? Where does she go to train?" She was met with a chuckle from the man. He answered, "Hey, it's Training Field 7, but don't even bother." Menma became somewhat intrigued by his statement. "How so?" "She lets no one get into the training field. She likes to train alone. So many people have tried to sneak in and see what she does, but she's found them all. No one can sneak up on her. No one? No one. In fact, she's even placed a wager, saying, quote, 'The first person to enter the training room covertly and witness my actions will witness an unprecedented sight.'" The hunter. Nin concluded, then sipped another beer. After giving the words some thought, Menma smiled behind his mask. He said, "Thanks for the information. Have a good day," as he left the bar and went out the door, picturing Training Field 7. He took off quickly, jumping from building to building as night fell and the sun, which was only partially visible due to the mist covering the islands, began to set. After locating the training field at last, he approached the imposing building and observed its architecture and design before realizing that the lights were on within. Bingo! He thought to himself before using his chakra to completely eliminate his scent, the sound of his footsteps, and his chakra signature, rendering him completely invisible to all five senses save sight. He stopped his foot an inch above the floor in the doorway as he was about to go through the doors, grinning at the trip wire that was set up there for anyone foolish enough to walk right through. He thought to himself as he crossed the tripwire and went inside the building, "Smart girl." Narrowing his eyes for a few seconds, He glanced left and right down the two separate hallways in front of him before chuckling a little. Menma smirked and said, "So, she set up a barrier that would send an alert should anyone pass through it. It won't detect what it can't sense." He then entered the invisible barrier without even setting it off and proceeded to one of the stadium. Like training fields' numerous entrances. He turned down one of the hallways and proceeded down its length, walking the entire distance without making any sound at all. He could hear metal crashing into metal and grunting from inside the training field when he got to the end, where there was a doorway leading to his left. When he entered the training area, he discovered it had been completely destroyed. There were large craters and scorch marks all over the place, along with abandoned training dummies that had been chopped and diced. He smirked, knowing that he had gone completely unnoticed and that he had just shown the hunter.nin wrong, when he saw Amari down in the arena. Like training field. He made the decision to go a few rows down, find a chair, and unwind while watching her train. Thinking he had misinterpreted what he was seeing, he briefly quinked his eyes and blinked. He blinked once more, then realized he was not seeing. She was flashing a little bit. More skin, he noticed. The sound of applause reverberated throughout the training field as she executed her final jutsu, lowering Nuabari and nearly bursting from her skin. Menma exclaimed, grinning, "Bravo!" from his place in the stands, while Amari just sat there looking puzzled. Next, without moving, she gave a shrug and laughed to herself before glancing back at him from the corner of her eye and remarking, "Well, look who we have here. The first guy to ever accomplish the feat of sneaking up on me is the one I just met today." Amari crossed her arms and sighed, and Menma laughed, "Keha. I'm afraid so." Menma stood up from his chair and leapt into the training field next to her, saying, "All right, get down here. Don't have to stay up there all night." When he saw that she was standing with her arms crossed and her bare, shirtless back facing him, his eyes widened. Amari laughed a little at his confused and awkward response, which he could only manage to say, She turned around and said, "Yeah, that's what I would expect. Well, as from the bet that I made, you get to see something no one else will." Menma's eyes widened and his muscles in his nether regions tensed slightly as she said this. With nothing to obstruct him from taking in the sight of her flawless D-cup sized breasts, she was standing there fully nude. At that moment, Amari simply laughed as he stood there motionless, his eyes fixed on them, his brain malfunctioning and dropping his IQ by about 30 points. "I knew that would happen," she exclaimed to herself before snapping her fingers to break Menma's daze. At last, he said, wow. You are beautiful," causing Amari's cheeks to flush more than her hair. She said, "Thank you," and then she averted her gaze from his mask. She spoke rather awkwardly, crossing her arms to cover her breasts, "You know, I never really properly thanked you for saving me today." This made Menma actually pay attention for a little while. Under his mask, he blushed as well, saying, "No need, it was no problem at all." Menma felt the tightness in his pants tighten as Amari stroked her arm and shuffled a little. "Well, I can't really settle for that. You see, I've been somewhat attracted to you since that fight and when you saved me," Amari said. Pay attention to the task at hand, he thought to himself, but then she glanced up at him, blush still visible, and that thought vanished from his mind. Menma laughed and said, That's kinda weird, same here." "All right, then," Amari uttered as she took a step toward him and exposed her breasts once more. To Menma's surprise, she then took his hand and placed it on her right breast. "Let's make the most of this little alone time we have together." Menma nodded, "My thoughts exactly," at which point Amari reached for his mask's tip and started to pull it up. "I've found him." Menma felt the lulling sensation of sleep gradually disappear, and he was able to begin to wake up as his eyes slowly opened. He began to push himself up after blinking and realizing he was beneath a bed's covers, with a sleeping form resting next to him. "What the heck?" he asked himself before noticing the red hair teasing itself above the covers. He grinned, recalling what had happened the previous evening. "Oh yeah, I've found him." The voice came to him again, and he blinked to see that it was his clone's voice. "What?" From where his clone stood, at the edge of a large cliff overlooking the churning sea off the coast of the main island, he explained, "I found the Rokubi's hiding spot. It's in an underwater cave off the coast of the main island. It took me longer to detect the Biju's chakra because of its location underwater and that there are multiple barriers preventing any chakra signatures from being sensed placed around it." Suddenly, Menma's happy, carefree mood gave way to a cold, cold-hearted, emotionless seriousness. He said, "Got it. I'll be there shortly," before getting out of bed so as not to wake the sleeping Amari. He then dressed, pulling his cloak back, and headed for the apartment's door. When he put his mask back on to cover his face, he looked back and his eyes lowered. He thought sadly, "I'm sorry, Amari, but I must accomplish the Eye of the Moon plan. I must." Then, he disappeared in an instant, teleporting to his clone's location with the shadow step technique. Menma's clone began to fuse back into himself, giving the real him access to all the information the clone had learned on its own. "So, he's down there, Menma asked. Before he took a step off the cliff and fell several hundred feet, he thought, several other chakra signatures are down there. Probably Anbu. Easy enough. Then, he sank deeper and deeper into the briny depths of the sea, surrounded by a cloud of bubbles as he did so. When at last his feet touched the bottom, he started to swim toward a massive underground mountain that loomed ahead of him, with a sizable cave bursting from its surface. Breathing out, he watched the bubbles of air emerge from beneath his mask and dove into the spacious cave. He swam down into the Earth's interior until he reached an underground lake, where he could see some light above him and, more significantly, the surface. He approached the surface cautiously, peering above the calm surface to see another cave close to the underwater lake's edge and two Kiri Anbu standing watch on either side. After observing them for a brief while, he submerged himself beneath the water once more, forming several wooden stakes from his body. Then, like a rocket emerging from the water, he caused the Anbu to pause in midair as he spun around, the wooden stakes encasing him like a porcupine about to erupt. He then unleashed a massive cluster of them that repeatedly impaled the four Anbu, splattering their blood like gory paint across the cave's wall. He landed in a sizable pool of blood that emerged from the dead Anbu's slumped bodies and went through the spacious cave entrance that was well lit by torches with. Menma asked, "Blue fire?" As he made his way through the dimly lit tunnel, he was perplexed by the blue fire because he had never before noticed the odd anomaly. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, and Menma could feel it was sinking farther and deeper into the ground because it was getting colder and he could see his breath now. The sound of his footsteps echoing off the old stone walls of the tunnel grew monotonous. In the stillness, the sound alone could drive a normal person insane. He was thinking, how long does this tunnel go on? And how deep am I under the surface of the earth? But he stopped when he noticed something on the wall. After examining it, he discovered that it was an old cave drawing of a lone figure with thrashing hair and what appeared to be a mask on its face. However, the mask had a sinister grin and hollow eyes, giving it a demonic appearance. But after noticing the Kirigakir symbol engraved on it, he deduced that the man was a Kiri shinobi and that the armor he was wearing indicated that it was from the First Shinobi World War. However, the man had several black tendrils growing out of his back that gave him the appearance of a monster with demonic tentacles. As Menma descended the tunnel, he saw more drawings of the man in caves. However, on the second one, he noticed the presence of a second figure, which was completely composed of black material and had its own mask. In the third, a second black creature joined the first, and so on, until in the final one, the man, who was still wearing the devilish mask, was accompanied by four black creatures. Then Menma ran straight into a huge stone door that blocked his path, bringing him to a sudden stop. He stood back and studied the picture engraved on it. It was a drawing of a cave with the man's mask in the middle and the faces of the black creatures surrounding him. Beneath the masks was a set of kanji that had been forcefully engraved, and Menma shuddered when he read them out loud. He said, "Welcome to hell. The lair of the four faces of the devil," and then shivered once more from the cold feeling he was experiencing from being so far below the surface. He dismissed the emotion and reverted to his emotionless, icy demeanor. "Knock, knock," he muttered to himself as he kicked the stone door hard enough to cause it to collapse. Upon entering, he was instantly unnerved by the sight of the walls illuminated by the same blue torches and coated in fluorescent blue chalk that mirrored the blue fire's glow. The temperature around the enormous pool of boiling hot magma in the center of the larger room was significantly higher than that of the chilly tunnel outside. The room itself was shaped like a hexagon, with a raised platform behind the magma pit and a darkened form sitting on it. The figure said, "You shouldn't have come here," and then he stood up to his full height. Menma narrowed his eyes to see the man's familiar red cloud adorned Akatsuki cloak and the Rokubi's chakra radiating from his skin. Menma's eyes widened as she realized that the man had turned to face her again and that, "They don't call me the four faces of the devil for a reason. Yahiko, The former Jinchuriki of the Sanbi was the man speaking to him, the same man as the drawing in the cave. Menma questioned, "Why do they call you that, I wonder?" while Yahiko smirked behind his mask. "I've been around for quite some time. I was one of the first to be admitted as a shinobi here in Kirigakure when it was first founded. When I was 22, I was sent on my first mission to help retrieve a package from Takigakure, but as a precautionary measure, I had a team of 4 with me. They were my closest friends and allies, all of them I could trust my life with," explained Yahiko prior to his temper boiling over, his dark eyes widening with anger. "But when we went to retrieve the package, it was a trap. We were attacked ruthlessly, and I is the only one left alive in a pool of my friend's blood. The man who did it was a user of the forbidden technique known as the Earth Grudge Fear, a gruesome jutsu that allows the user to transform his body into a ragdoll, his very limbs held together by black threads." Menma felt the temperature gradually drop as Yahiko told his story. "In blind fury, I ripped out his heart and absorbed his jutsu, becoming a carrier of the Earth Grudge Fear myself, and brutally murdered his teammates, ripping their bodies to shreds as I skewered them with the multitude of black threads I now had in my body. Afterwards, I became a gruesome fighter among the ranks of Kirigakure. All of my faces would strike fear into any who would oppose me." Menma asked, "Faces?" and Yahiko jumped down from his perch to stand directly opposite him on the other side of the magma pit. "All 4 Heart's Eye posses were of my wrongfully murdered teammates. They are my faces, and each mask they wear is the same as the ones they wore that day, so that they would never be forgotten. I became the devil that day, killing for the fun of it for almost 100 years. Menma swallowed slightly as Yahiko started to undo his Akatsuki cloak, revealing that he had nothing on underneath and letting Menma see the different stitches and threads holding his body covered in tattoos together. The fact that the masks he counted about were sewn onto his back was the creepiest aspect. He thought, "What kind of fucked up jutsu is this?" As he hunched over, clenched his fists, and felt his back begin to stretch apart, he also started to growl. The masks on his back began to pull away from him, exposing a mass of black threads struggling to escape as the skin that held the mask in place started to stretch thin. Menma sputtered with disgust, and Yahiko moaned as his back broke apart and exploded, sending a massive mass of black threads flying out in all directions and congealing into 4 different hideous creatures. One was a bipedal demon wearing a Kiri mask with 3 yellow triangles spanning its left cheek. The one nearest him resembled a demonic tiger with a red line running from the top of the mask down the middle until it reached the bottom. The creature to his right wore a special mask, with 1 blue circle beneath each of the regular eye holes that allowed an Anbu to see. The beast itself was shaped like a malformed biped, with both arms on the right side of its body. The final creature had an Anbu mask with a single green triangle on the lower portion of the mask. It had the appearance of an odd, deformed creature with 4 legs and thin wings. Then Yahiko's back stitched itself back together and he stood up to his full height of 6 feet 2 inches. These are the 4 faces of the devil. They are the basis of nightmares that could make even the strongest man fall. The thread monster with the blue circle and Anbu mask roared, releasing a hideous screech before its mask split down the middle and opened like a mouth with a crack, leaving Menma stunned. "Maiden! Kirai no Uzumaki!" exclaimed Yahiko, and a swirling vortex of purple fire shot straight at Menma from the beast's mouth. He immediately felt the unbearable heat from the purple fire hitting the wall and melting the stone as he rolled aside to escape the whirling conflagration. He thought, "Holy hell, it's melting the wall," when the winged, masked creature suddenly materialized next to him and cracked open its mask. "Shikuden! Kajosatsu!" Menma yelled, "Fuck!" as he was struck at point-blank range by a red, fiery ball that, as it struck, began to evaporate every drop of water from his body. Instinctively, he used the cells from Hashirama that were flowing through his veins to grow a tree from himself that caught fire and helped him escape, even though the tree was quickly drained of all moisture and reduced to dust. Grunting a little, he hit the ground and rolled a few feet before seeing the 2 other masked creatures surround him with their masks snapping open. "Jinten! Doka Genshi Hosoku! Bako, Keshouden, Yokozure!" Menma exclaimed in confusion, "Keshouden?" just as the creature with the 2 arms on the right side unleashed a translucent white cube that encased him and restricted his movement. Then, turning around, he gasped as a white hot bolt of pure plasma shot out from the second beast's mask faster than light, piercing through the cube and right through his chest before exiting through the other side and dissipating. His eyes widened at that point. Menma collapsed to his knees, gasping as the blackened hole in his chest, directly over his left lung, made breathing extremely difficult. His flesh was healing too slowly, leaving him vulnerable to attack. Menma gasped for air and said, "Plasma release." Damn, that hurt. Suddenly, Yahiko's fist struck Menma in the jaw, sending him flying across the cave and into one of the walls, where he collided with a plume of dust and debris. Menma gripped himself away from the wall and inhaled deeply as his lung was eventually fixed. Fuck, the dust release, plasma release, scorch release, and dark release. Fucking hell, he thought angrily. Menma smirked and got back up, popping his dislocated arm back into his shoulder and rolling it around while Yahiko watched and his masks moved to encircle him once more. Not playing around I can play that way, he exclaimed. Yahiko remarked, "Go ahead and try to beat me." Just as Menma put his hands on the ground, the cavern began to tremble violently. Menma calmly uttered, "Mokuton Hajutsu. Jukai Koden." Then, the floor gave way beneath them, tearing the room apart and sending them hurtling through the earth toward the surface at high speeds. Eventually, they broke through the seafloor and emerged into the ocean above, creating a sizable island of trees off the coast of the Man Island that was home to Kirigakure. Menma thought to himself, "Now I can move around," just as the leaves on the trees behind him began to rustle. Immediately after, the winged mask beast emerged from the foliage and unveiled its mask. Yahiko exclaimed, "Shikuden! Kajosatsu!" As he emerged atop the trees and the beast hurled multiple red fireballs at Menma, who ducked under each one as it struck the tree, turning sections of it into dust. Menma struck another beast while running, which knocked him forward. A third beast then materialized in front of him, shooting another burst of purple flame that sent him soaring into the air. Keshouden. Yokozure. Menma was completely split in half by the beast's second hot plasma beam, which he swept across his body in a horizontal motion. Yahiko smirked behind his mask, then gasped when a hand that was holding his still beating heart burst out of his chest, spraying blood everywhere. Menma sneered, "Good job, you killed my wood clone, but I win." Yahiko then pushed Menma off his arm, causing his lifeless body to fall onto the tree branch they were standing on. Menma's eyes clouded. His mask studied him for a moment before the dust affinity mask leapt back into Yahiko's body, the black threads that had formed it being drawn back through his skin, and the plasma affinity mask shot another beam at him, forcing him to back away. As the mask it was wearing broke into minuscule fragments, Menma saw Yahiko's body jerk and his eyes widen as the mask's heart caused him to come back to life. Menma shuddered a little as Yahiko got himself up off the ground and started to sew up the hole that Menma had made in his chest before the three masked beasts that remained surrounded him. To his surprise, the two affinity masks, the Dark and the Scorch, morphed into one larger creature made of thread. It was at least 7 feet tall, with 2 arms on each side and the small wings that came with the Scorch affinity mask. The two masks were positioned side by side in the middle of the mass. As the beasts charged him once more, Yahiko stooped down and let his arms hang limp, challenging him with a dark smile. "Bring it." Menma yelled, "Rasenringu," as he hurled a spiraling ring at the two masked creatures. When they easily avoided it, he cursed and opened both of their masks, revealing a single ball of purple and red fire in each creature's mouth. Oh shit. Menma had to make a snap decision and dive to the left as the two masks combined to unleash a combined conflagration of red and blue flames that slithered through the air and zipped straight at him. The attack completely destroyed the tree he was standing on, burning it alive and sucking out all of its water. Menma sarcastically thought, "Great. He can combine the attacks of two of the masks to make them even more powerful." Just before the third mask suddenly jumped into the air and opened its mouth to fire another plasma beam, which fortunately only pierced Menma's right shoulder, rendering it temporarily useless due to the complete burning away of the muscles and nerves in that area. Saiken spoke from within Yahiko, "Keep it up, he's wearing down." The two were moving in perfect unison as they obliterated Menma. Yahiko questioned, "Have you been able to identify who he is by his chakra?" Saiken fell silent for a short while. "No. But I do sense something inside of him. Much like myself. The chakra of a Biju." "Did he take one of the Biju he stole and seal it within himself?" Saiken said menacingly, "No, this chakra is different from Gyuki's and Shukaku's. It's like Naruto's. Only darker." Yahiko was a little perplexed as to how this man could possess Naruto's chakra. "Wait a minute. The only person I can think of off the top of my head that could have Naruto's chakra is. Saiken retorted, "You're not thinking it's Menma? That's impossible. We can't rule out everything, Saiken. We have to assume that it might be Menma under Indra's influence or something. He was kidnapped, remember?" "Yeah." When a rapidly expanding cloud of dark red chakra shot Yahiko's plasma affinity heart backwards with a stake through its body, he was forced out of his thoughts. When he felt the heart inside of it get impaled by one of the wooden branches, killing it, he flinched as more branches emerged from the black threads. His own heart and the two that were joined together were the only 3 hearts remaining when the beast vanished and the mask broke. When a hand covered in chakra gripped the edge of the branch Yahiko was standing on, his eyes narrowed at the dark red chakra. Eventually, though, they widened as he saw the masked man slowly change into the version 2 state of a fox. His skin and cloak were coming off, and his mask was falling off, exposing his bared fangs, his birthmarks that resembled whiskers, and his red, enraged eyes first. "Menma," he stammered, and then Menma dropped to all fours, growling low in the back of his throat. Menma roared, "That's it. You've pissed me off. Now I'm going to murder you before I take your beast." Just as Yahiko braced himself against the wind with his 2 remaining hearts, Menma unleashed a wave of chakra that joined him at his side. "This is bad. He does have a biju inside him, or at least has the chakra of one," replied Saiken. "Menma, what the hell are you doing stealing biju? What did Indra do to you?" exclaimed Yahiko, taking in his 3 additional hearts and remaining still as the dark red chakra of a biju covered half of Menma's face. The chakra bones of the version 2 state began to form, the skull beginning to encase his head and the spine down his back, 6 tails swishing behind him. Menma laughed, saying, "Nothing at all, Mr. Dear former friend. All he did was show me the right path to restore peace, and give me what I have inside of me." Yahiko exclaimed, "Gave you what?" just before Menma's red slit eye was replaced with a dark orange eye that was rife with malice and evil intent. The biju inside Menma spoke through him, making Yahiko's skin crawl. "Me, the opposite of the Kyuubi. The Kuro Kyuubi. I am the embodiment of all that is dark and evil. I am Menma, and he is me." Saiken stammered, "A Kuro Kyuubi? Indra was able to create a biju?" Yahiko then gritted his teeth. "Saiken, we have to go into version 2, now. Right." With a slight growl, Yahiko knelt down and his version 2 mode burst into action. It covered his body with a dark red chakra, similar to Menma's, but with a lighter tone, indicating that he had not formed chakra bones. Yahiko shouted again over the roaring winds created by the 2 Jinchuriki entering their version 2 states, "Menma, listen to me. Indra is controlling you somehow. Just stop fighting and this won't have to get out of hand." But his plea went unanswered. The Kuro Kyuubi said, "Enough talking. Let's see how our power compares to that of the Rokubi." Menma answered by charging Yahiko from the front. Cage building, Kirigakure, Lady Mizukage. A scared Kiri shinobi, perspiration streaming from his brow, ran into Mei's office and asked, "What is it?" "Yahiko's fighting the masked man off the coast of the island above where he was being hidden, and what?" The man sputtered, "The masked man is a Jinchuriki. They're fighting in version 2 states." Mei's eyes widened, but she quickly shrugged it off and took action. "Stay away from the fight. I'm sure Yahiko can handle this. When the masked man takes a fatal blow, we go in his back. Up, got that?" "Yes, ma'am." Amari ran into the office past the shinobi as he left to deliver orders, asking, "What's going on?" Mei informed Amari, shocking her with the news, "Yahiko is currently fighting the masked man. Stay away from there until the fight is over." Before she hurried out the door, leaving the anxious Mei Terumi alone, she thought, "Menma wasn't there this morning when I woke up. It couldn't be. I have to know." "Tree Island," Yahiko exclaimed, "Sansan," as he parted his lips and shot out a massive cloud of pink gas that, upon colliding with the trees they were standing on, destroyed them along with everything else in its path. Menma launched himself into the air, opening his mouth wide as he began to gather yang and yin chakra. He roared, "Biju! Dama!" as he created a miniature-tailed beast ball and launched it toward Yahiko and the island of trees, making him scramble to gather his thoughts and cover himself with his tails. Yahiko was thrown down into the ocean's depths as the island of trees burned and the ball burst into a massive red dome of chakra. He lamented, "Damn! as he plummeted to the ocean floor and his chakra cloak started to reassemble after part of it was torn away by the explosion. Naruto's not going to be happy when he finds out his son has been stealing the Biju. No shit. We need to go full on, balls to the wall. Saiken said, let's do it, you and me, as the two synchronized their chakras, causing his version 2 form to enlarge and turn white. Menma asked, where are you? As he stood on the water's surface, steam rising from his feet as he looked around for signs of Yahiko. Suddenly the water churned all around him and his eyes widened before an intense beam of chakra exploded out from the water, completely overwhelming him and sending him rocketing up into the sky while Yahiko, fully transformed as Saiken, emerged from the ocean after firing off the tailed beast ball he formed as a laser. He was relieved that he was big enough to stand on the ocean floor and still be above the water's surface. But Menma was still in the air, his body heavily bruised and his version 2 cloak all but destroyed. Before his black dot red chakra encased Menma's unconscious form and started to grow larger, forming appendages and tails, the Kuro Kyuubi uttered the words, allow me. Menma said, go right ahead, Shuka, just before he passed out completely and gave his Biju complete control over his body. When Yahiko looked up and saw a massive mass fall back down and crash into the water, Saiken exclaimed, here he comes. The figure was briefly obscured by a plume of liquid before it was revealed to be a full-sized Kyuubi, with the exception that its fur was a very dark shade of orange. Menma, Shuka said, he's taking a break, now it's just me, before baring his teeth and hunching down to stare at Yahiko. So that's the Kuro Kyuubi. I can feel the evil swirling around inside of him. We cannot lose, Yahiko. All right, he answered, then braced himself for the fox's onslaught. When he saw Menma emerge from Shuka's skin and settle onto his head grinning broadly, he narrowed his eyes. Even more tragic was the fact that Menma was perched atop the enormous fox's head, which stunned Amari when she saw it on the precipice. The giant fox and slug were set to battle it out in the water. She suddenly recognized him as the masked man, the one who had attacked Kumogakure and Sanagakure. No. Menma exclaimed, let's go, Shuka, as the Kuro Kyuubi charged Yahiko and threw back its clawed hand to take a swing at him. He reached down to grab another tailed beast ball, but amazingly, Yahiko was incredibly nimble for a giant slug and easily avoided the swipe. He yelled, Biju, Dama, and hurled the enormous ball at Menma and Shuka, who hesitated before he deflected it with 3 of his tails. Shuka yelled, right back at you, as he pushed the tailed beast ball back and struck Yahiko. At first, nothing happened, but then the ball exploded in a huge explosion that shook the earth and the sea and lit up the sky in brilliant red and orange. Yabiko was the only one with an advantage in this situation as the two titans were hidden from each other by a layer of smoke created by the steam from the superheated water. Because of the hiding in mist technique, Saiken remained as silent as a mouse even in his massive form. Menma wondered, where did he go? As they waited in silence for their opponent to make a move. Unexpectedly, Yahiko emerged from the steam and forcefully struck Shuka's side with his head, depriving him of air and causing him to plummet into the waters below, almost toppling Menma from his elevated position. Menma yelled, enough of this, Mokuton. Mokuryu no Jutsu. Just as the huge wooden dragon with a hook nose slithered out of his body, encircling Yahiko and draining his chakra in the process. Haruma. Yabiko moaned, and then his slimy skin began to release an extremely repulsive substance that began to eat away at the dragon, freeing it from its bonds. Shuka roared, that won't get you out of this, as he finished swallowing a tailed beast ball and spat out a compact laser that hit Yahiko square in the chest. Saiken exclaimed, this is not going too well. As Yahiko collapsed to the waves, steam pouring from the laser's impact. You think? Yahiko asked as he stood back up and gave Menma a quick glance while standing on his Biju's head. Yahiko took deep breaths and said, we can't fight him forever, we'll run out of chakra eventually, and I can't hold this form for long. We haven't perfected our sync yet. Saiken assessed the situation. After a few moments of silence, he finally said, I'm at a loss at what to do. At that point, Shuka smiled cockily, flashing his fangs. When Yahiko saw that Menma was whispering something in his ear, he started to get suspicious and wondered what the two might be talking about. Saiken warned Yahiko, be careful, these two are unpredictable. Then, with a sudden flash, Shuka and Menma were gone. What the? Yahiko asked himself before Shuka suddenly punched him in the jaw and threw him back a few hundred yards when he turned to deliver a follow-up blow. Shuka immediately attacked Yahiko again, sending him hurtling into the water and smashing all 9 of his tails into his body. This caused enormous waves to pound into the cliff's rock face, while several other Kiri shinobi looked on helplessly. Yahiko grunted. Yahiko moaned in agony as he struggled to pull himself out of the water, only to be slammed back down by Shuka's foot, the fox sneering down at him. "Hurry! He's charging us again!" cried Saiken. Menma squatted down on his head and peered down at the bruised Yahiko, saying, "He's just about finished, isn't he?" Yahiko breathed, "Saiken. Saiken, listen to me," before groaning slightly from yet another wave of agony. "What? Give some of your chakra to Menma. Secretly hide it in him. The time will come and he'll have it when he does." Without saying a word in sorrow for him, Saiken nodded in silence, then, without realizing it, sent some of his chakra to Menma before turning back to face him. "It is done. Saiken. Seems this is the end for us. How about we end this on a high note, Saiken?" Yahiko asked, grinning, before gathering his chakra for what would likely be his final jutsu. Yahiko got back up and stooped down a little as Shuka was about to reach down and grab the giant slug by the throat when he was thrown off of him. He exhaled heavily and exclaimed, "Ha! Ha! Biju! Dama!" as he began to assemble the enormous ball. Menma gave him a small smile in return. He yelled, "Meet him halfway," as Shuka opened his mouth and began to form his own tailed beast ball. One shinobi cried out, "Oh shit! 2 tailed beast balls! We've got to get back, everyone, get away!" And all of the Kiri.nin who were watching the fight started to flee the cliff face, afraid they wouldn't be around when they exploded. Yahiko poured more yin and yang chakra into the enormous ball, causing it to grow exponentially 2 sizes larger than Menma and Shuka's. "Come on! Bigger!" he exclaimed. Shuka increased the size of his in return, creating 2-tailed beast balls that were now so big they could be considered planetoids. Yahiko yelled, "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me," as his tailed beast ball suddenly grew to 3 times the size of Shuka's, and he launched it straight towards Menma and Shuka. Their tailored beast ball shot out and smashed into the Yahiko's, the 2 slamming into each other before the 2 dense balls of chakra exploded in a colossal sphere of fire and chakra that quickly grew to scrape the cliffside. The explosion's shockwave also swept away the water beneath it, creating enormous tidal waves that struck the cliff face with such force that some of the rock broke away. The 2 Jinchuriki were engulfed in the explosion and lost sight of each other inside the enormous ball of fire that rocked the earth and lit up the sky. A minute later, the fire died down and the light disappeared, allowing a great cloud of steam to envelop the ocean as the Kiri.nin began to repopulate the cliff. Is it over? Did Yahiko win? The steam started to slowly clear away, and they all waited, very anxious, to see what would be revealed behind it. Menma stood on top of the severely injured Shuka, who had been badly injured by the blast, inside the steam barrier. Menma stood up from his head and he grunted through gritted teeth, "Ah! All the bones in my body, broken. Can you stand up?" "No. And I don't think I can be revived when I die like the other Biju, since Indra created me." Menma looked around for a moment and then cursed, "Shit," before turning to face Shuka again. "Hee, guess we'll have to go to plan B." Menma questioned, "Which is?" Shuka said, "You absorb me and become the new Kuro Kyubi. It's simple, kid." Menma nodded and pressed his palms to his skin after blinking a few times. Shuka bid Menma farewell with a final, "Good luck, kid," before Menma started to absorb his chakra. Eventually, Menma was standing on the water's surface, his new chakra pulsating through his veins, a fully fledged Biju. "Now, where is the Rokubi?" he uttered before stepping into the surrounding steam. After a short while, he looked around and discovered Yahiko unconscious and floating on the water's surface from chakra exhaustion. With one hand gesture, Menma said, "Kachiyose no jutsu. Kohaku no Johei." A puff of smoke appeared next to him, and the amber pot materialized. Similar to how, after defeating Gaara, he opened Seiken's seal, inadvertently giving the Kiri.nin peering through the steam a glimmer of hope when they saw his enormous outline through the gas. One exclaimed, "There he is! He did it!" And soon the others were yelling and applauding, and Mei was just breathing a deep breath of relief. Amari, on the other hand, was devastated to learn that Menma was the one stealing Biju and that he had passed away. All of Kirigakir's raucous applause abruptly stopped as they watched Seiken's form vanish. When the smoke cleared, they were horrified to see Menma seal Seiken inside the Kohaku no Johei while wearing a new mask over his face. "No!" exclaimed Mei before Menma turned to face them and noticed Amari. Upon seeing the terror in her eyes, he felt his heart break apart with a sharp pain. He muttered, "I'm sorry," and then vanished from sight. A few Anbu then descended onto the water next to Yahiko's body and swung their swords in the air, hitting nothing. Now, there were just 4 Biju remaining: Naruto, Matabi, Kakuo, and Chomei. Conan. With a terrified expression on his face, Senkuku turned to face her again and was relieved to see her blink a little. With several black chakra blades driven into her back and side, limiting her movement and leaving her incredibly weak, she remained on the ground. The 6 paths of pain in Nagato had attacked them viciously, and they were now forced to pursue the fight through the numerous tunnels and secret passageways spread throughout the city. Here, in a sizable room decorated with pipes, they eventually located Conan and fatally wounded her. Meanwhile, Senkuku was still fighting despite having several stab wounds that should have caused him to bleed to death, including 5 chakra blades piercing his bare back. With Conan's assistance before she got hurt, he had killed and sealed the Naraka path and human path, as well as restrained 2 of the pains they were fighting with his shuriken chains. The first animal path and the Preta path. That left only Nagato, Yahiko, and the second animal path. As Yahiko and the second animal path started to move slowly away from him and encircle Senkuku, Nagato in particular was observing him with narrowed eyes. He lowered his blood-covered arms, his gauntlets stained crimson from his own blood, the chains he had extended out still restraining the human and Preta paths, thinking, "These people don't know when to quit. I've shredded their SS many times over and they still aren't dead. What could be keeping them rooted to this world?" Senkuku exclaimed, 3 against 1, All right, let's dance." And then he threw the captive pains back into Yahiko and the second animal path as he charged at Nagato. Before lifting his arm and unleashing the unseen force on him, he uttered the words, "Shinra Tensai." In an instant, he transformed into a mist and sidestepped the attack entirely. He then reconfigured himself into flesh and used his gauntlet of claws to strike Nagato. With his face entirely devoid of any emotion, the man held up his arm and let the poisoned claws sever his wrist while pressing his other hand deeply into Senkuku's abdomen. "Shinra Tensai. Fuck it," cursed Senkuku, who felt the controlled burst tear open his stomach, tearing open a hole through his entire abdomen and sending him flying back to slide to a stop beside the slowly expiring Conan. He forced off the rebreather he was wearing and spat some blood as he struggled to get back up, the pain overwhelming him. Suddenly, Yahiko was in front of him, shoving his foot squarely into his jaw, sending him rolling repeatedly to the right and left across the floor, his back hitting the room's wall with a loud snapping sound as his spine snapped. He thought to himself, that fucking hurts. Can't give up. I have to fight," as he used his chakra to stop the pain in his spine and got back up off the ground, hacking out more blood from his lungs. "It's useless to keep fighting," Nagato uttered, but Senkuku recognized that Indra was speaking through him despite the fact that it was his voice. "That's what you think. As long as I still breathe, I will fight," he smirked and said, collapsing to his knee as the chakra blades in his back started to agitate once more. "Well, when the eternal dream comes true, that will all come to an end. I just need the remaining Biju and the Crimson Moon Scroll," Nagato uttered, before forming a second black chakra blade in his hands and approaching him at a leisurely pace with Yahiko and the animal path positioned on either side. "I wonder what you intend to do with the Scroll of the Crimson Moon?" questioned Senkuku, who got back up and clenched his hands together, spitting out some blood that had collected in his mouth. A little rain began to fall, and as the paths of pain drew nearer to the lone fighter, Conan watched helplessly as her injuries caused her vision to gradually fade to black. As thunder echoed throughout the city, Nagato spoke, "With the Scroll of the Crimson Moon, I plan to revive the demonic statue of the Outer Path on the eve of the Red Dawn, and with the Biju, revive the scourge of this world. The Jubi." Senkuku's eyes narrowed at the menacing name. "Well, I'm sorry to say it, but I'm taking you with me and I'm not letting you leave here alive. Teiko Shokuan Hachi Sukisasu. Sweden." As 4 black seals formed across his bare chest, Senkuku let out a furious, several tentacles of water then shot out from his body, impaling Yahiko, Nagato, the animal paths, and the Preta path, forcing them to remain close to him. Fuinjutsu ura shisho. Senkuku uttered those words just before the seals protruded from his body and a pitch black liquid started to seep and flow from him, accumulating into a rapidly expanding pool near the impaled paths of pain. While the Preta path simply absorbed the water tentacle and allowed the three to escape, the seals expanded to form a rapidly expanding black sphere that destroyed everything in its path, including the animal paths of pain. Nagato quickly detached himself from the water tentacle and freed Yahiko. The black sphere vanished, and when they emerged back into the room, they saw Senkuku's body on the floor, the seal on his chest now dark red, and Konan nearby. A small trickle of blood trickling down her chin from a small puddle that had formed beneath it. Both had long since vanished, the warmth from their bodies gone. Unfortunately. That being said, a megacure won't pose a threat going forward. I opened my eyes and broke contact with Nagato, then got up from where I was sitting in the big cave beneath the crater that housed the mountain's graveyard, Indra uttered. He removed a small scroll from the pockets of his cloak and brought Nagato and the others back to the cave, where he deactivated them for future use. He peered around the walls, which were covered in antique weapons that had once belonged to the cave's previous occupant, Madara Uchiha, and he smiled slightly as he put away his mask. The Red Dawn is drawing near, but Menma has been doing a great job of eliminating the Biju, leaving only the Nibi, Nanabi, Gobi, and the Kyubi. All I have to do is quicken the pace a bit. It's time to bring a new card to the table, he remarked as he opened the scroll he was holding and removed the item sealed inside, a particular kunai that carried a specific person's DNA. Then White Zetsu materialized next to him, working quickly to create a White Zetsu clone for him to use. After executing the required seals, he carried out the Impure World reincarnation. Afterwards, the casket materialized, and he smiled once more as its lid dropped, revealing who was within. Are you sure this is a smart move? He inquired, Indra's smile only widening before he subdued the individual within and made him emerge from the coffin without giving him back any emotions or memories. White Zetsu, of course. I'm just temporarily altering the course of events. We'll send him after the other Biju while Menma goes after the scroll, Indra said, causing White Zetsu to grin mischievously in response to her doubtful expression. Before having the reanimated corpse remove its haori and put on a solid black cloak with a large hood, Indra returned the gesture. Before he left, Indra took him away for a brief period of time, and when he returned, his eyes had been replaced with brand-new ones. Don't you think that his new eyes will give him an advantage in combat? Yes. Things are about to get interesting. Indeed. A megacure rising from his crouched position over Senkuku's corpse, Genkaku cursed, damn it. Things just keep getting worse and worse. He turned to face Noboru, who was examining Konan's body. Noboru took one and studied it, saying, yeah, but look, these are the same chakra rods that Naruto has, but they're emitting a different chakra than his. One more malevolent. You're right. And I don't think anyone else possesses these besides him and Akayuri, unless. Genkaku said, glancing at Noboru. The two of them gulped slightly, realizing that the only other group Akayuri had ever been a part of was the only other group that could have used these weapons in combat. That's impossible. They must have been reincarnated or something. Well, this would support Naruto's claim that men using the Rinnegan abducted Menma. Damn. Noboru approached the puppet master and knelt down next to Senkuku's body when he noticed something entwined in his fingers. Wait. Look, he exclaimed. The radio necklace has been programmed to record. He may have taken notes on what they said. With great excitement, he spoke, and as he hit the play button on the tiny microphone, Genkaku crouched next to him to listen. The microphone repeated, it's pointless to continue fighting, and before Senkuku's voice could be heard, Genkaku and Noboru narrowed their eyes at the strange voice. That's what you think. As long as I still breath, I will fight. Well, when the eternal dream comes true, that will all come to an end. The mention of that name caused the eyes of Genkaku and Noboru to widen. All I need now is the remainder of the Biju and the scroll of the Crimson Moon, the unfamiliar voice said once more. Wasn't the scroll of the Crimson Moon lost more than 10 years ago? Asked Noboru, but when Senkuku's voice spoke once more, Genkaku shushed him. I wonder what you intend to do with the scroll of the Crimson Moon. The two thought the recording had ended when there was a brief period of silence, but they were relieved to hear someone laughing. The voice then cut off, The rain it was drenched in, scorching its circuits and rendering it useless to them. With the scroll of the Crimson Moon, I plan to revive the demonic statue of the Outer Path on the eve of the Red Dawn, and with the Biju, revive the scourge of this world. Can the demonic statue of the Outer Path be resurrected? Is that Indra's strategy? However, what connection does capturing the Biju have with resurrecting the demonic statue? And what did it mean when that guy said, "Scourge of this world"? It was probably Indra. Naruto might know the solution. Please hurry up, we are returning to the city to bury them properly. Akatsuki Tower in Taiyo City. With his elbows resting on his desk, Naruto brooded, the scroll of the Crimson Moon. I've heard of it before. What Indra says is true. So what? It can restore items that were previously destroyed, asked Noboru, to which Naruto nodded slowly. Yes, but only on the eve of the Red Dawn. What Red Dawn are you talking about? Genkaku raised an eyebrow and asked. The thought of the scroll again caused Naruto to furrow his brows and let out a deep sigh of concern. It's an extremely rare and peculiar anomaly that happens once every 100 years. Both Akatsuki members shuddered at Naruto's description of the phenomenon. It's when the night grows darker than ever, not even the stars are visible, and the moon turns blood red, illuminating an eerie red glow. Eerie. Noboru shivered. We have to seize the scroll of the Crimson Moon before Indra has a chance to retrieve it if he intends to use it. Fortunately for me, I know where it might be, Naruto remarked, putting on his Akatsuki cloak and making his way to his office's doors, turning to see Noboru and Genkaku turn. How? Considering that scroll. Before leaving the office, Naruto smiled and said, my former sensei from Konoha. Jiraiya hidden it. Genkaku and Noboru looked at each other and then shrugged. In the vicinity of Frost Country, Menma was alone, strolling down the road toward the next location of Nanabi and the Nibi, when he was abruptly stopped in his tracks by the appearance of Indra's ghost form. Change of plans, Menma, you don't have to capture the Biju anymore, well, not for long anyways. How is that? Right now, we have another person working on that. It is now time to begin phase 2. Find and take the scroll of the Crimson Moon, Indra commanded before his ghost vanished and Menma was left alone once more. I wonder where the scroll would be now. Somewhere in the heart of Fire Country. Naruto shoved past a few bushes and dabbed at his perspiration, feeling a little irritated by the humidity. I think I'm almost there, he said to himself as he made his way through the undergrowth until he came to a clearing. There, he discovered a tiny patch of grassland with some large trees gathered in the middle, surrounded by cliffs. Yes, it is, but given his history with Jiraiya, it's likely that he set some sort of trap to help safeguard the scroll. It is really valuable after all, he reasoned before estimating the jump's height. He knelt and used his chakra to shoot himself through the air, across the grassy field, and to the edge of the small stand of trees in the middle of the field. Simple as pie. Okay, so now. He eventually came upon a small wooden shrine inside the little forest of bamboo rods and trees, and that's where the scroll was. Before the little shrine, Naruto knelt down and studied the seal for a moment before smiling. A teleportation seal with a 4-corner seal. Not too shabby, Jiraiya. But it's not a problem for me, Naruto remarked, making a series of hand gestures before resting his hand on the seal. A few seconds later, the seal vanished, enabling him to access the shrine and take the scroll. Rising to his feet, he tucked the scroll away and placed his finger against the earpiece he needed to radio in his status. I possess the scroll, he said, I'll be back shortly, before vanishing in a column of fire. Meanwhile, a figure with a white porcelain mask concealing malevolent intent emerged from behind some trees near the shrine. There you are. Genkaku was taken aback by Naruto's abrupt return to his office, but he was reassured to see the scroll in his grasp. Go down to the vault and secure this. Before throwing the scroll to the puppet master, Naruto uttered the words. Without this, Indra's plan is as good as finished. Just as he turned to leave, a sickening feeling suddenly came over him, and he realized that the source was standing right behind him. His eyes widened in shock and terror as he turned around and saw that the masked man was standing just outside the window, using his chakra to stick to the glass before he reared his arm back and smashed his way in. Genkaku, flee! Cried Naruto, and the puppet master bolted from the room, leaving Naruto by himself with the man who is infamous for having caught Biju. I believe that scroll belongs to me. I doubt it. Clutching his fists, Naruto glared at the man's mask's blank face, wondering who was hiding behind it. I'm not going to let you have it, Indra. Sadly, that is not who I am, Indra. I'm completely unique, a wild card, if you will. Naruto clenched his teeth as the pain in his stomach intensified. And right now, I'm getting this feeling, this horrid feeling in the pit of my stomach. It's coming from being near you, the man growled. Who are you if you're not Indra? I should know that, and you should never find out. I would now like to take the scroll, if you would please. What about me? I thought you were also capturing Biju. Unfortunately, Kyuubi. I'm going to save you for last, the man growled as his chakra erupted all around him. Naruto replied, very well. I'll be waiting for you then, and then he slid a kunai down his sleeve and into his hand. Give me the scroll, or I might just capture you now. Naruto growled back at the man, baring his fangs and saying, go ahead and try. Excellent, was the man's response before he launched himself at Naruto with such speed that it caught him off guard. He punched him in the stomach and then launched himself out of the office and over the city below with a roundhouse kick. Fortunately, he landed in the outskirts of the city, but things didn't go well when he tried to stand up and doubled over in agony from the 2 hits he had received as well as the intense, stomach-wrenching sensation he was experiencing from the pit of his stomach. Why is this hurting so much? This sensation, this excruciating sensation, makes me queasy. The masked man landed in the grass, his fists clenched and his dark red chakra flaring all around him. Growled the masked man. Jigoku no Ain no Hano. Kaijiten, said Naruto, just before an enormous quantity of red fire shot out at the masked man, making him leap back while the flames burned endlessly, setting the grass on fire and engulfing the plain in flames, all the while leaving Naruto unharmed in the center. Never ending fire. Similar to Amaterasu's dark flames, but these flames never go away. What a deadly method, he exclaimed, clinging to one of the big boulders emerging from the grass. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the sight of him combining several hand signals. Daijiren no Jutsu. Mokotan. With a shout, he threw out his arm, causing his skin to turn brown as a massive clump of sharpened wood branches shot towards Naruto. The stakes struck the ground, trying to impale him, but the Biju was too quick. He launched himself into the air and pulled his arm back, a red ball of chakra forming in his hand and taking the shape of a spinning shuriken as it did so. Rasen Shuriken, Happy Ramen Ringu. Naruto held up his arm to block the light as he squinted from behind as their 2 attacks connected in the middle of the distance between them, causing a massive chakra explosion that shook the earth and instantly lit up the area in bright light. With his guard down and his guard down, he thought, that jutsu looked almost exactly like my Rasen Shuriken, and then he doubled over in pain as the gut-wrenching feeling returned. The masked man took it without question. Using one of his father's special kunai, Naruto parried and blocked the sword as the man attacked him with a kunai sword while the blinding light persisted. He ducked under a swipe and stabbed at the masked man's gut, but faltered when the feeling in the pit of his stomach intensified, allowing the man to knee him in the jaw then kick him back. Magnificent, he said, hurling the kunai sword with remarkable accuracy. The blade sliced through Naruto's shoulder, severing the nerves there, rendering his right arm immobile until he used his chakra to heal them. He fell back into the still, burning fire below and skidded a few yards before stopping. He grunted slightly as he got to his feet, removed the kunai sword from his shoulder, and threw away the blade. The masked man emerged from the flames and lifted Naruto into the air as he attempted to escape the strangling hold, but just then a hand materialized out of the fire and grabbed him by the throat. His eyes met Naruto's and he growled, "I told you, I will get that scroll," as he readied one of his most gory jutsus. As he entered his version 2 state, Naruto clenched his teeth and his body erupted with chakra, forming 6 tails and the chakra bones. He then brought his right hand down to his mask, making deep claw marks over the right eyehole while releasing himself from the masked man's grasp. Dama Biju. Raging, Naruto created a miniature-tailed beast ball and, much to the masked man's dismay, fired it straight into his stomach. With a force that pushed him back several hundred feet, the ball exploded, carving out a large portion of the ground, and the fox skull that hung over his head snapped shut, blocking out the intense wind and light. Before the light went out and his smile disappeared at the sight of the person standing in the middle of the explosion. Caused crater, he thought, eat that bastard. As the dust settled and his severely bruised body became visible, the masked man sighed, "You almost got me there, but it wasn't enough." Half of his mask was missing, exposing part of his forehead and one eye, and his cloak was severely torn, with half of it missing on one side and his entire right arm shattered in the explosion. Naruto squinted at the angry, looking eye that was staring back at him, giving him a slight shiver. So where did we end up? As he pulled off the remaining portion of his cloak and made a series of one-handed gestures, he asked. Naruto noticed that the area of his body with the lighter skin tone was more pasty white than the rest. Mokuton. Shikwan Keitai Sicho. He uttered as his bones, muscles, and skin began to regenerate until his right arm had grown completely again. He then tested his muscles for a little while to feel them again before crouching down and snarling in a deep voice. Are there any other techniques you possess? Naruto assessed the circumstances and studied his opponent, noting that he possessed the ability to grow new limbs. Based on this observation, he devised a strategy. Seems I'm just going to have to make it to where he can't grow back what he lost. As the flames around them raged on, he crouched low to the ground and locked eyes with the masked man, sinking his claws into the earth beneath them. Then, in an instant, he was gone. He moves quickly. The masked man was instantly knocked off his feet, and deep claw marks appeared across his chest. Naruto slid past him and then launched himself back at him, attacking with such fury and speed that the masked man was left with no time to defend himself. Enough already. The masked man growled as the numerous claw marks on his body began to heal themselves, not with the aid of his cells, but with his dark red chakra. As he roared, sending a wave of chakra shooting out of his body and throwing back Naruto. Using his chakra to heal himself. A Biju or a medical nin is the only ones capable of such feats. Before the masked man suddenly thrust his hand into his throat and propelled him skyward with superhuman strength, catching Naruto off guard, not even he could free himself. The masked man snarled, "Since I can't capture you yet, I'll give you a taste of what I will do to you next time we meet." He then brought Naruto's face very close to his, where their eyes met, and the latter couldn't help but stare into them as they started to glow. Jigoku. Heijun Kyuubi. He growled, causing Naruto's eyes to widen before the jutsu started working right away and he was thrown back. He started screaming in excruciating pain, and even for the Kyuubi, the pain was unbearably intense. He felt as though he was being burned alive in a lava and fire pit, and that every torture device ever used was impaling his body. His body was covered in deep cuts and multiple stab wounds, and dark patches of burnt skin materialized. The agony kept getting worse. The masked man kicked Naruto onto his back, looking down at his writhing body as the wounds worsened and worsened as the jutsu took full effect. He walked through the growing pool of blood that was forming from the injuries. Now, for the scroll. Underground base Akatsuki. Genkaku flew through the numerous corridors and passageways of the base beneath the Akatsuki Tower, heading towards the high security vault that contained various items belonging to the organization. Genkaku, what is happening? Questioned Noboru, who joined Genkaku in their run through the subterranean base. I have the scroll here, where Naruto found it, but that masked man guy just charged at us out of nowhere. When I last saw Naruto, he was getting ready to attack the man in his office. I'm not aware of his current situation. What? Oh my god, I hope Naruto understands the situation he's in. He is capable of managing himself. Before they reached a heavy oak door that they opened right away and stopped in their tracks to see who was waiting for them inside, Genkaku remarked, "He's not the leader of the Akatsuki for nothing." The masked man asked, "If you will please hand that over to me," as he watched them go through the vault doorhole that allowed him to enter through the hole in the ceiling directly above. Oh no! Noboru exclaimed just before the door behind them closed with a loud thud. The masked man's multiple wooden roots were growing out of the ground to block the door and keep them from leaving. He held out his hand, waiting for them to hand over the scroll, saying, "This will make it a whole lot easier for me if you would just hand me that scroll you have there." Genkaku growled, "Over my dead body." The masked man sighs and tilts his head slightly to the right and right in curiosity. As much as I'd like it to be true, it will happen eventually. In any case, I'll work out a deal with you if you refuse to give it to me. Which one is it? As he reached for his swords, Noboru asked. I won't catch the Kyuubi if you give me the scroll. I currently have a clone with the Kohaku no Johei that is prepared to seal the Kyuubi at this very moment. Please hand me the scroll, and I'll tell him to back off for the time being. Dryly speaking, the masked man said, making Genkaku and Noboru turn white in response. The former was hoping his bluff would pay off. Noboru growled slightly in frustration. Genkaku, as much as I don't want him to have that scroll there. We need Naruto more than it. The man's suggestion put the two in a difficult situation. You can either give up the scroll and save your friend and leader, or you can keep it and lose their Biju leader. Damn it, Genkaku cursed, letting go of the scroll and hardening his eyes before tossing it to the masked man. Grabbing it, he held it in one hand while using the other to make a sign. Many thanks for that. He said, I'll be on my way, and then he was gone from sight, the ceiling hole sealed and the wooden roots on the door behind them rotting. Come on, we need to get Naruto. Menma emerged from the city's outskirts and stood next to Naruto, who was still shivering from the excruciating pain shooting through his veins and had curled into a ball with his arms wrapped around his bleeding midsection. Menma silently observed Naruto for a few seconds before walking right past him and vanishing into the darkness as Genkaku and Noboru fled the city gates in search of him. Look, there he is. Hurry up and get him back to the city. The periphery of Shimogakure, the cloaked figure, walked to the edge of a cliff overlooking the frozen village of Shimogakure, the village's surroundings, the snow-capped forests, giving it a similar appearance to the land of iron. He narrowed his eyes before the red one in the left eye socket started to spin and change shape, becoming something akin to a two-bladed shuriken. He smirked as soon as he realized that he could see the invisible barrier shielding the village with his other eye and that it extended beneath it. He thought to himself, typical. Then, he combed out some of his hair and took out two kunai, one for each hand, but these were not like the others. He thought, this is going to be easy, and then he was gone in an instant.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.